character, known as the Baskerville family's Hound, Vikir van Baskerville, who was wrongly framed by his family and father even though he was loyal to them, was sentenced to death by guillotine. Vikir, at the moment of his death, thought to himself that if he were to ever live again, he would hunt down his prey no longer as a hound again. An unsettling scene is introduced to Vikir as he tries to make sense of his surroundings. Feeling that his body was heavy and in an unknown setting to him, he thought that he was in hell. In the grand estate of the Baskerville family, babies are seen in their cribs, crying and making noises. A man is introduced as the Patriarch of the Baskerville family. He comments that the babies were insignificant. He walks through the room, commenting that the babies gathered this time were trash. As he walks he notices Vikir being silent as compared to the other babies. He orders the servants to bring the babies to the Cradle of Swords. The servants obey. Vikir recognizes the man as the main culprit behind his death in his previous life. Hugo le Baskerville. Seeing Hugo's younger appearance, the MC concludes that he had regressed to back when he was a baby. Recalling his past life, he was a hound, born from an illegitimate family, while receiving training in a poor environment. Hounds must be devoted to missions that include assassination, intelligence, ambush, and others. A hound simply takes care of dirty work. This was so that the Baskerville could remain the best amongst the 7 families. The MC remained loyal because he wanted to be acknowledged by the family and Hugo. However, 10 years after the gate to the demonic gate was opened, even with the victory of the humans against the demons, the reward our MC was given was being put down like a simple dog. The main reason behind his execution was that he knew too much. MC clenches his fist, swearing to never live that life again. MC wanted to take revenge immediately but was unable due to his baby's body. He rolls around angrily. He realizes that he needs to become stronger and that the Cradle of Swords was the perfect opportunity. The Cradle of Swords was a trial that every child in the Baskerville family must go through. Children are thrown into a maze of swords, where they need to reach the Styx River to be assessed for their talent. The Styx River was a legendary river that turns children's bodies into iron but is limited to the number of children it can affect. The MC recalls that the fastest route to the river was a straight path out of the helix-shaped wall of blades. The MC crawls past the swords, remembering that in his past life, he could not receive the effect of the river, making sure that this time was different. For men are watching, as the MC dunks himself into the river, wanting to keep it all to himself as long as possible. The MC begins to sink into the river. The water seeps into his wounds, being first had its advantages. The MC covers his mouth to endure as long as he can regardless of the pain. 2 servants are shouting to the MC to come up of the water else he dies. Hugo simply laughs. He asks Barrymore, the head butler, how much time has passed. Barrymore replied that around 7 minutes have passed. Hugo is amused at the fact, stating that the MC might die since 7 minutes have passed. Hugo calls out to the MC, asking him to come out. The MC ignores his calls and continues to absorb the power of the river with all his might. He loses control, and with his eyes gone white, he continues to endure the pain before blacking out. Hugo holds the MC by the foot, stating that staying in the river was enough for the baby and that he even drank its water. Hugo notices that the MC had already grown his teeth. Hugo asks Barrymore what the child's name was. Vikir van Baskerville. Barrymore replied. Hugo with a smile on his face speaks the MC's name Vikir, stating a very greedy son had been born. While being upside down, the MC continues to plot his revenge against Hugo, waiting to sharpen his canines for the time when he can rip his head off, making the Baskerville family disappear into history. Vikir van Baskerville was known to be a genius at the age of 8 but was considered normal in his family. At 20 years old, he took on the assassination, espionage, and conquest-type missions. At 29 years old, he felt the limits of his swordsmanship compared to the others in the direct lineage of the family. At 30 years old, the demonic realm gate was opened, marking the beginning of the Demon's Clan invasion. At 35 years old, he endured the era of destruction, slaughtering monsters left and right. At 39 years old, the war came to an end with human victory. At 40 years old, Vikir was finally rewarded for his loyalty. The reward is defamation, false accusation, and the guillotine's blade. Vikir opens his eyes, looking at the ceiling, realizing it was a nursery. He flips over in excitement as this meant that he had successfully absorbed the power of the Styx River. A servant approaches and places a box in the crib of Vikir, saying why the madam would give such a thing. Vikir notices and wonders why anyone would give him a gift. The box opens slowly. Vikir is taken back, as a long dark figure slithers out of the box. The Vikir recognizes it as vipers called bloody mambas, thinking that the madam sent those here to kill him. Knowing who madam was, as few were called that in the family. The vipers hissed at the Vikir. Vikir quickly grabs both vipers by the throat while smiling widely like a blood-driven hound, as he expected such treatment from the Baskervilles. He strangles the vipers with force, thinking to bring down the family with his own 2 hands. Blood stains are seen on the bedsheet of the crib. The next day, the servants are shocked, seeing the Vikir sleeping soundly whilst surrounded by the dead bodies of the vipers. Orders were given to execute the nannies after being tortured, who was on shift the night the vipers came, but the reason for their appearance remained unknown. Only Vikir knew the truth. 8 years later, Vikir is sitting in class, listening to a lecture. The teacher talks about the different levels of swordsmanship. Sword beginners are those unable to use mana. Sword experts were those who could use even a little bit of mana. Sword graduators were those that could emit mana in a liquid-like aura form. The final level, where aura is solid and its form freely changeable, is called the Sword Master. He noted that the strongest member of the Baskervilles, Sir Hugo, was at the Sword Master level. The children are in awe of this fact. Vikir thought to himself that he needed to regain his strength just like in his previous life before his coming-of-age ceremony. The teacher notices Vikir being lost in thoughts and highlights his achievements. Having a strong body due to diving in the Styx River for 7 minutes. And that teaching him one thing would lead him to understand 100 things, being more talented than the others, knowing the Patriarch would be happy with this. While Vikir thought of how long it would take to kill Hugo at the age of 8, a set of triplets grins widely as they stare at him. A hand shoves Vikir as he is called Garbage Van. It was the triplets. Having heard the weird rumors about Vikir being in the river for 7 minutes and strangling 2 vipers when he was a baby, they approached him. Vikir remains silent as he recalls his memories of these 3. Knowing that they were the ones to stab him when he was running away due to the defamation in his previous life. They were called the Hugo Le Baskerville Trident. We'll simply call them high, middle, and low. They shouted at Vikir to stop lying, stating that they didn't like him. Knowing they'll be troublesome in the future, Vikir decides to put them in their place now. High points a knife at Vikir, stating that his body was like steel since he was in the river for so long, making him immune to injuries from blades. High asked if he could test it. High calls Low. Low covers Vikir's mouth to stop him from breathing, stating he would eat his hand if Vikir endures for 3 minutes. Vikir decides to play along with their scheme. 1 minute passes, as High and Middle believe that the rumor was fake. 3 minutes pass, and they realize Vikir was good. 10 minutes passes, and they were too stunned to speak. They decide to let Vikir go. A crunching sound is heard as Low looks at his hand, and blood appears. Vikir spits as Lo screams in pain. High and middle shout at Vikir asking what he was doing. Vikir, with bright red eyes, as he wiped the blood off his smile repeated that they said they would eat their hand. High and middle refute back by saying they weren't scared of Vikir but Lo was afraid as he held his bleeding hand. High and middle stare at Lo in disbelief. They attempt to leave to find a priest to fix Lo's hand but the Vikir stops them. In anger, High stabs Vikir in the stomach, stating they were older than him. To his surprise, the knife didn't cut him. Vikir reminds them that being in Baskerville meant that power and talent are greater than age. High screams in pain, as Vikir twists his hand. Vikir, in Hound mode, grins widely and tells them to play till the end with him. High, in pain, shouts that the rumors were true as Vikir lets go of his hand, giving him a punch straight to the face. Middle and Lo are shocked as High falls to the ground with his teeth broken and nose bleeding. Middle attempts to fight but Vikir simply kicks him to the side with no effort. Get wrecked, son. Lo stumbles onto the ground, shocked at what had happened. Vikir tells him to not be afraid as he'll get better in no time once treated. But warns him as he picks the knife off the floor, that he won't be leaving the room. And that they had to live with the discomfort of their own bodies at this rate. Vikir offers one of them a chance to leave the room, as he stares at the knife in his hand. Lo asks which of them could leave, as the other two brothers hold their wounds. The knife is tossed to them as Vikir tells them to decide amongst themselves. Vikir slowly exits the room and mentions he can't wait too long and that it should be decided quickly. With blood-red eyes and a grin on his face, Vikir turns to them as the door closes saying at least one of them should live. As the door closes, the triplets are left in shocked, but soon stared at one another. Sounds of fighting and yelling could be heard behind the doors as Vikir stands to listen while smiling. The Trident of Baskerville have began to split. Barrymore reports to Hugo that another bloody situation have occurred with the Morgue clan in regards to the ruby mines, with the Morgue clan stating that it was theirs. Hugo says an opportunity in the future will allow them to discuss it properly and wonders what else was there to report. Barrymore reports that Vikir had scored the highest in the Titan exam. Hugo smiles happily at that fact and wonders when the practical exam will happen. In 5 days, Guardian Knights have left to prepare. Barrymore replies, making the fortress vacant now. Barrymore further reports about the fight between the young masters, stating that there were no deaths but that High's teeth were completely damaged, Middle's jaw was smashed in and Lo's left index finger was amputated. They had recovered from their physical injuries but their mental state was damaged. Hugo is surprised to hear that the triplets were fighting amongst themselves as they were close with one another. Barrymore states that Vikir was involved, causing Hugo to be alarmed. Vikir is seen standing before Hugo and Barrymore. He greets Hugo as the Patriarch. Hugo tells Vikir about how he disabled the triplets. Vikir replies that they had received the proper medical treatment since then. Hugo states that their hearts were disabled. The triplets were no longer eating or talking together anymore, making their combination technique completely torn apart. Vikir smiles in silence. Hugo asks if it was wrong that Vikir turned his brothers into a total mess. Vikir replies he was simply stronger and wonders if the stronger person is ever wrong. Hugo shares that his brothers had came before and forgiven him. Vikir recalls a past memory, where the youngest daughter of the family that Baskerville ruined paid Hugo a visit. She had become a nun and told Hugo she forgave him and offered him a mass. Hugo's response was as Vikir speaks it out loud that forgiveness is just an excuse made by the weak who cannot seek revenge due to their lack of strength. Vikir's eyes glow red as he spoke those words. Hugo is elated at what was said as he smiles widely. Hugo recites the family motto, "Only the strong will reign supreme," weakness is a sin. Hugo rewards Vikir by allowing him to take any snack from the food storage. Just enough for him to carry. Vikir is happy and asks for chocolate as he thanks the Patriarch for the reward. As he turns to leave, Hugo calls him his son and to do well on the interim evaluation, not to lose to direct descendants. Vikir is disgusted at what he hears but replies yes my lord anyways. Barrymore introduces the infamous chocolate enjoyed by the gourmands of the Morgue clan, saying it's the highest quality which was hard to get. Vikir declines it, saying he needs cacao beans that have a rich aroma. Barrymore and the chefs were confused at the request. Cacao beans colored purple called bloody beans were given to Vikir, each bean being able to produce 100 liters of chocolate. Vikir tastes them and is appalled by their taste. Barrymore wonders to himself, that Vikir must really like chocolate to eat such bitter beans on their own and that he was brilliant for finding a way to get chocolate even with the restrictions placed by the Patriarch. The chef asks if he wants to process the beans, Vikir declines and takes them as is. Barrymore wonders if Vikir had such peculiar taste. However, Vikir did not get the chocolate to eat but to use them in the practical exam 5 days later. Up in the mountains, Vikir stands, grinning widely knowing that a huge catastrophe would occur that has never happened in the clan before. Children of the Baskerville family are put through strenuous events and early education from a young age. Being able to take their first steps meant they had to run up a steep mountain. Never allowed to lie down or be on their stomachs. Time to sleep is only ever with a monster corpse to adjust to tough environments. When completed, they turn 8 years old, starting their deadly evaluation. Bringing us to the practical evaluation, which is a survival exam. The young masters are gathered in a territory far end of the Le Rouge-et-Noir mountain. Pavlov, the instructor of the exam, instructs the masters on what needs to be done. Survive for 1 month while hunting large and strong monsters. 10 points were given for surviving. 30 if they survive without being disabled. Failing others and surviving 50 points. Surviving after beating a monster, 70 points. If all conditions mentioned were done, 90 points. Stealing badges from others make their points yours. Dying results in 0 points. 100 points do not exist. Pavlov reminds them of Hugo's lesson that a swordsman dies when they become arrogant. He advises them not to leave the designated area as the mountain contains many undiscovered things. During the exam, shadow dogs will hide and grade them. Gossip spreads amongst the candidates as they talk of the rumors about Vikir. Wondering if he was going to be good at the practical as well. Vikir smiles as he remembers the mountain. The triplets avoid looking at him. Pavlov rings the bell, marking the start of the exam, and praying for their fortune. The young masters instantly vanished, each with a plan of their own. The triplets argue with one another. The killing was not prohibited as it resulted in deducting points. Pavlov smokes a cigarette knowing that the shadow dogs will keep casualties to a minimum. A shadow dog is seen following Vikir. Wondering where he was going, looking forward to Vikir's skills due to his previous achievements since young. Vikir arrives at a huge tree, noting that the soft ground is best. He decides to live and take a break here as the shadow dog watches him. Shadow dog is shocked at him taking a break. Vikir gathers wood and is building things like in Minecraft as the others fight amongst themselves. The shadow dog is in disbelief as Vikir simply was gathering resources and wonders if he plans to just hide here. He decides to leave. Vikir takes note that he had left while reminiscing about the past. Before, a subordinate had told Vikir that cacao beans make fish less smelly and that bloody beans were the best. Vikir stares into flames and smoke knowing he had finished preparing. Deciding to start hunting as pits of spears are seen surrounding him. A few days have gone by as Vikir walks into the restricted area. Back when he was a scout, he could walk around here causally. He notes a burning smell and finds burning poop. Yes, poop is on fire in this world. Meaning only one monster has that kind of poop in this area. Vikir is happy to find what he was looking for. A beast with flames in its mouth stands above Vikir. It was a hellhound. The hellhound was a beast that swallowed the hellfires of the oil world, causing its body to become one with flames. Vikir was barely able to defeat one at the age of 18 in his past life. Being 8 years old now, it was impossible for him to defeat it now. However, Vikir, thanks to his past life, he knew a way to beat it. He dashes towards the hellhound. Knowing that one of its weaknesses was moving in straight lines only, making it hard to change directions but easy to dodge. The hellhound is stunned that Vikir dodged. Vikir opens a bottle with water, spraying it across the ground as it was another weakness for hellhounds. They could not step across any volume of volume. This causes the hellhound to avoid the water on the ground as it runs towards Vikir. Thanks to the water, it exposes another weakness that all canines have, opening its mouth while running. Vikir takes a step back as the hellhound lunges at him with its mouth open, the exact moment Vikir waited for. Vikir flicks something into its mouth, and causally dodges the hellhound as it tries to circle back to Vikir. However, the hellhound feels something was wrong and stumbles to the ground whimpering. Vikir reveals that chocolate was poison to canines, and since one bloody bean could make 100 liters of chocolate, it was the ultimate poison for it. The hellhound lays on the ground whimpering, unable to move. Vikir walks towards it drawing his sword, looking for where the ribs aren't present to target its kidney. The hellhound whimpers in pain as the sword pierces its body. Vikir does the final blow and a blue essence forms from the body. It was called XP or Karma, created when you catch monsters after energy accumulates in their body making them stronger. Vikir absorbs it, making the short sword he wields lighter. Vikir is happy as he'll be able to catch up to his regression state before he is of age. He wonders what Hugo's face would make when finding out that an 8-year-old brought back a monster whose rate is B+. With this monster, Vikir secures first place in the practical test and has decided on what reward to get. The reward is a book that only he knew its true worth. Vikir proceeds to decapitate the head of the hellhound but senses a presence behind him. He turns to see 4 more hellhounds. He wonders if they came because of its cries and that they wanted to avenge it. Vikir chops off the head of the dead hellhound, excited at the thought of fighting more of the hellhounds as he had more beans left. However, a bigger presence is felt by the hellhounds, and Vikir notices. Believing the hellhounds to be afraid of his bloodthirst, the hellhounds bow their heads in fear. But hellhounds never submit even if they were to die. Vikir realizes something and turns around to see a 3-headed figure. A Cerberus? Vikir is alarmed as it has a rating of A+, but it was supposed to be at the 7th ridge. Why was it here, Vikir thought. Vikir notices wounds and blood dripping from its body. Multiple arrows with other injuries were inflicted upon the beast upon closer inspection. Vikir concluded that it was because of the barbarian tribes across the mountain as it was their territory and that it came all this way because of being chased by them. Vikir saw the chance of a lifetime. To hunt an injured A+ beast. He must kill it no matter what. Vikir had been hiding his power, having mastered the 3rd Baskerville technique and being at a high level as a sword expert. But he had already reached a level that no other hounds have reached when they had become adults. Vikir covers his blade in aura and dashes to the injured Cerberus. He attempts to slice one of its heads but was interfered with by its other head. He slices it in reaction. Upon slicing it, he realizes that killing it was possible. Due to the war with demons, Vikir was able to polish his swordsmanship and there was no sign of unnecessary movements to his techniques. Add on his strengthened body from the river Styx. All weapons Vikir worked against the Cerberus. But that was what he thought. Reality hits him hard, as the Cerberus lands a deadly blow on Vikir, smashing his sword to bits. Vikir lets his guard down for a moment, resulting in a deadly blow from its claws. Vikir is flung straight into a tree. He coughs blood as his eyes turn white from the impact. He suddenly awakens, thinking if he had lost consciousness after the direct hit that was dealt to him by the Cerberus as it walks towards him. He feels the pain in his left arm, making him think that his arm had been ripped out. He checks to see and is surprised to see his arm still intact. He thanks the river Styx effect for keeping his arm. The Cerberus readies for another attack. It dashes toward him, smashing the tree that was behind into bits. Vikir leaps out of the way before it could harm him. He thought to himself, even though his arm was still there, the damage still remained and that wouldn't be able to take a second hit. The Cerberus turns around. With the odds against him, he thought of the situation as a journey that every experienced hunter must find a way out of. He thinks of the best possible action to take and decides to simply just run away as fast as possible. The Cerberus was alarmed seeing him running away. It chases after him. Vikir thinks that he was lucky that the Cerberus was injured, else he would have been torn apart by now as he continues to run away from it. He just has to make it past the iron fence, making him exit the restricted area. Vikir leaps over the iron face and readies himself to reach the place he had prepared beforehand as the Cerberus reaches the iron fence as well. If he was caught before reaching that place, it would be the end for him. The Cerberus rips apart the iron fence with its face, roaring loudly as it continues its chase. Dashing through the trees, he looks around to spot the area. He notices a pile of wood in front of the tree, making it the area where he was supposed to be. He runs with all his might, just a little bit further, he thought to himself. A bit more. He screams as the Cerberus chases right behind him. Realizing it was the perfect moment, he leaps into the air just as the Cerberus opens its mouth to attack. A single step forward onto a marking causes it to sink into the ground. Vikir lands on his back, safe from its attack, breathing heavily. While the Cerberus was met with many spears hidden in the ground below. He welcomes it to the cradle of swords. Wiping the sweat off his face, he was happy that the traps he made for hellhounds were useful against the Cerberus. Bloody beans were spread onto the spears that were in the ground. Being the same species as the hellhounds, the Cerberus was poisoned easily as its two heads cough vomit and are in pain. Its middle head notices Vikir, growling at him. As he holds a spear aimed at it and throws it with all his might. The spear bounces off its body as it growls loudly toward Vikir. Vikir starts to count down from 7. With each step the Cerberus took, a second passed. It slowly reaches Vikir, as the countdown approaches 0. Once it reached 0, it simply fell to the ground. Vikir lets out a sigh of relief as the Cerberus falls to the ground just before him. Happy to know that the rumors were true about the 7 steps. He explains that the spear he threw was different. That it was laced with the poison of the bloody mamba's venomous fang from when he was a baby. He goes on to absorb the mana from the Cerberus, meaning that it was fully dead this time. He stares at its corpse, thinking about how he should bring it back. But before that, he had something else to do. He knew that the presence of a Cerberus meant one thing: dungeon. Since its gatekeeper was dead, the dungeon was free to be explored. Vikir proceeds to cover himself in dried soil, rotten leaves, and moist roots. Looking at its footprints and drools, he backtracks it. He walks to an opening, saying he found it. He enters the cave, recalling that the cave was meant to be discovered in a few years' time. He stares deep into the cave, feeling its mana underneath the rotten surface, knowing that it has not been discovered yet. No light was given out, making the cave seem deeper than he thought. He smiles happily, excited at what treasures are laid within the dungeon as he slowly enters. As he walks further deep into the dungeon, Vikir notices red veins of ruby minerals throughout the area. Feeling that they were connected to the Red All Mountain. He notices light appearing before him, indicating that it was the entrance to the dungeon. The light shines brightly at him, making him cover his face with his hand. He enters a large room, and at the center of it was a floating red stone. Realizing that the dungeon's interior was bright due to the mana imbued into the ruby as he approaches the floating ruby. He notices something behind it, a skeleton with a note. Showing that someone had been here before him. He inspects the skeleton, seeing its injuries caused by stabbings and that there were dried brown bloodstains as he picks up the note on the ground. A long time has passed for the skeleton. Vikir reads the note and recognizes it as a Baskerville member's writing. The note reads that the writer did not want to reveal his name, and asks to be called Cain. The reason behind the note was to prevent other generations from doing what he did. Further explaining that the stone chamber was talked about in the family as a legend. His brother, Abel, and he had coincidentally came across this place, raiding the dungeon and its countless trials. They had killed many monsters before arriving at the chamber, to find the final assignment to the place. The final assignment tied their feet here for a very long time. 3 years to be exact. Vikir can't believe that they stayed for 3 years, hinting that the brothers really wanted the treasure and that the final assignment was somewhere in the chamber. He looks at the stand of the floating ruby and sees some writing. When entering it's 1, but once inside it's 2, when leaving it's 1 was the riddle written on the stand. The note continues, with the brothers contemplating the ominous text forever until they came to a conclusion. The fact that they were twins meant that they were once one in their mother's womb, but when given birth they became 2. Meaning to get the treasure they had to become one again, and only one of them could leave with the treasure. After a fierce battle, Cain killed his brother and there was only one left in the stone chamber. But there was no change at all. Cain wonders why the treasure did not appear even after killing his own brother. He wonders why screaming. He decides to leave, wanting to tell others that found this place to leave immediately and that there was nothing to obtain in this devil's den that only serves to taunt humans. Vikir concludes that the brothers had done all sorts of things, only to leave empty-handed. Knowing that he had no twin, Vikir believes that the brothers had misinterpreted the text as he looks at the ruby. Thinking of the riddle once again. He thinks hard, knowing that no dungeon cannot be beaten. Upon looking at the skeleton again, an idea comes to mind. Vikir figured it out. Stating that the brothers were unlucky due to being twins, and that idea had they fixed to it. He mentions that the answer lies in the dungeon as he reaches for the ruby. Saying that when he entered the dungeon, he was 1. But as soon as the ruby light was cast upon him, he was 2 due to his shadow. He smashes the ruby into pieces, knowing that without its light, darkness re-enters, making the stone chamber open its final stage. The riddle answer was shadow. Pieces of the ruby that fell to the ground started to rise up, and energy from the rubies opens the passageway in front of Vikir. Vikir smiles happily as the final stage opens. Revealing a sword, the relic of this devil's den, the cause of the brothers' death. The sword glows red with an evil aura. The text below it states that only those with Baskerville's blood can wield Beelzebub. He was shocked to find that the sword was Beelzebub as he stands in front of it. He recalls reading a picture book during his childhood about the gluttonous fly, Beelzebub, who was an unprecedented great monster that invaded the lands in the old legends as part of the devil's holy constellation called the 7 Calamities. To stand up against the 7 calamities, the heads of each of the 7 families took one each. The first patriarch of the Baskerville fought against Beelzebub. Remnants of Beelzebub were stored in the lands of the Baskerville. Its demonic energy was said to lure monsters, an old legend that no one believes now. But the legend was true, as the sword was taken by the demon clans, resulting in countless deaths among the humans on the battlefield. Vikir grabs the sword in excitement, saying that it won't happen again, as the sword was now his. As he holds on to the sword, it lets out a ferocious energy as if it was howling. He grunts loudly as the sword seems to be absorbed by his hand. The sword places itself into Vikir's hand before appearing as a blade from his arm. He mentions that he was lucky to have a blade made from a devil's holy constellation, as the blade exudes a murderous aura. His red eyes glow similar to the blade as he raises it to his face, wondering how much stronger he'll be in this life. Looking around, he realizes that there was nothing else for him to take and prepares to leave. But he feels something was wrong with his body. He stumbles onto the ground, wondering what was wrong. Was he dizzy? No, he was hungry. The blade makes noise and Vikir wonders if it wants to eat something. He leaves the dungeon, holding his stomach in hunger. Hunger was ringing inside his stomach. Noting that his sense of smell had improved as he smelled something delicious. The sword pulls him along, much to his surprise, wondering if there was something to eat in the direction it was pulling him to. He reaches the corpse of the hellhound he had killed before. The blade shoots out a tube into the corpse. As it absorbs the blood, Vikir feels his inside were getting back to normal, guessing he was starving for a long time. He hoped that the mountain's dried condition was not due to the sword's hunger and wondered how long it takes to feed it. Beelzebub makes a happy sound as it had eaten well and has absorbed the hellhound's ability, hemorrhage. Vikir wonders if this was Beelzebub's inherent ability. Beelzebub was the glutton of files and was said to possess the power to absorb its enemies' skills as its own. Since its absorption amount was close to infinite, many people lost their abilities and became obsolete. But due to its hazard, Vikir could absorb 3 skills only for now. He describes the hellhound's ability as a skill that constantly pumps out the blood of its opponent even through its smallest wounds. Realizing he could steal abilities, he looks at the Cerberus corpse. Beelzebub grows excited at the thought of feeding on it. Vikir is alarmed and asks it to wait. He explains to it that it can't eat all of it as if it was too damaged. He couldn't explain it during the autopsy. He thinks silently as Beelzebub makes constant noises as it consumes the corpse. He slaps Beelzebub, saying he had enough. Beelzebub was upset but had gotten 2 new skills. He had even absorbed the power of the sewer rat underneath the Cerberus. Vikir picks up the rat, happy that he had absorbed many powerful skills this time. He decides to wait at the practical exam site as he was done preparing the monster. The young hounds had gathered back together, each covered in various injuries. They would receive a shield, sword or necklace as their reward based on the parts produced from the monsters they hunted during the practical exam, as monster parts are laid on the table. The senior members are astonished at what Vikir had hunted. Hugo is alarmed to hear the news. Barrymore reports that Vikir during the practical exam had accidentally crossed over to the restricted area, allowing him to hunt an A+ Cerberus. He further reports that it was wounded by the Barbarian clan and that Vikir had applied poison to his wooden spear, as Hugo mentions that a Cerberus was something that even the family's guardians would avoid. Hugo further asks what kind of poison could kill a Cerberus and where Vikir had gotten it. Barrymore mentions that the report did not include such details and wanted to ask Vikir, but Vikir had returned to the dorm as he was too tired. Hugo compliments Vikir, saying he was so sly already and that information was power, and that power is your worth. Barrymore was shocked that a master named Van and not Lo or La was this talented. Hugo replies that he was unlike the previous leaders. He didn't discriminate against a hound based on its bloodline when raising them as long as it had enough talent and spite. Adding on that there were mutts that came from the royal bloodlines, asking if Barrymore understood him. Barrymore is concerned as he ponders whether Hugo was thinking about his second son who was preparing for isolation training as he apologizes to Hugo. Hugo says it's alright and asks for Vikir to be summoned. Vikir stands in front of them with a smile on his face. Hugo asks how he caught the Cerberus during the exam. Vikir says that he placed the chocolate on his wooden spear, saying that it was lethal to canine monsters. Hugo asks if that was the reason why he asked for chocolate before, and Vikir says yes. Barrymore thought to himself if this is how fathers and sons usually talk to one another as they didn't greet each other. Hugo further questions Vikir on why he did not respond, and the butler asked him about the hunt. "He wasn't my master," Vikir replied. "Who is your master?" Hugo asks. "The master of the clan, since he belonged to the clan," Vikir responds. Hugo is happy with the reply. He rewards Vikir with the corpse of the monster and grants him a wish. Vikir wishes to be granted access to the 10,000 Epistle Library. The 10,000 Epistle Library was one of the largest libraries in the Empire and resided deep within the heart of the Baskerville clan. Hugo ponders, asking if he knew that only the Patriarch and second in command along with their direct descendants were allowed to enter. Vikir says that if it was not permitted, he would give up on it, thinking that he needs to sneak in instead. Hugo grants him access, much to Vikir's surprise. He asks him to read the 6th technique of the family located within the 6th restricted zone deep inside the library. Vikir is stunned as he was just given permission to learn a technique that an illegitimate child was not allowed to. Recalling that Hugo's current level was the 7th technique and that in his past life, Hugo had reached the 9th. Remembering the discrimination he faced in his past life, Vikir promises that in this life, he will surpass Hugo. As he will obtain the greatest essence of Baskerville, a textbook containing the teachings of the first patriarch who subjugated the 7 great disasters. Hugo stares at Vikir, looking forwards to his progress, and wishes him luck. He bows his head thanking Hugo and saying he'll surpass his expectations. 2 guards stand in front of a large door. Vikir enters the room, leading to the library. He stands there saying it was the first time he came in person. He searches through the books, seeing the names of the books that he had wanted to learn in his past life. Knowing that any illegitimate child could not learn any of the advanced techniques to ensure that they do not bare their teeth towards their master, this was a defense mechanism the Baskerville family had created. A book is locked with a chain and he wonders if this was the book. Vikir takes out a key, not believing that Hugo would offer him the book on the 6th technique, an opportunity that was never given in his previous life. As he turns the key in the lock, he wonders if Hugo thought that he couldn't memorize the technique in a day. As he reads the book, Vikir recalls that due to his past life, he had memorized the theory behind the 1st to 4th techniques till he was sick of it. He did it so that he could deduce and speculate the theory behind the 5th technique. Believing that he needed to stop the flow of mana after drawing the 4th tooth, he wonders if that was the reason he could not make the 5th tooth. According to the Baskerville swordsmanship, one tooth represents the 1st technique and the 2nd tooth represents the 2nd technique, and so on. When drawing a tooth, a red sword energy appears. Vikir flips through the book, stating he didn't care about the 6th technique and that the real reason he came here was different. He returns to the guards, who were surprised to see him come out of the library already. They asked him if he had left something outside and that they were getting it for him, as well as that there were more books about swordsmanship deep within the library. He tells them that he had finished what he came here for. The guard asks if he wants to stay longer, but he declines and wants to read other books and that they should do what they need to do in the meantime. As Vikir walks to the spiral staircase, the guards whisper to each other saying that the place he was going to only had miscellaneous books and that if they were Vikir they would be busy reading the books deep within the library. They wonder if Vikir didn't know the worth of the books, but Vikir chooses to leave them to their thoughts. Knowing that they did not realize the true value of the books in the miscellaneous section. He reaches the next floor and looks around the books, noticing one that stood out. He found it, the book called A Lurking Ambush. Vikir is happy to find it. He opens it to see a ripped page and that due to it, it became a useless miscellaneous book. He grins widely as he was the only one that knew its true worth. Recalling a memory from before his regression, Vikir belonged to a squad that had found a strange relic in the dungeon that was on the border of the Le Rouge-et-le-Noir mountain. It contained a page from a swordsmanship book. A single ripped page. Written with Baskerville handwriting, only Hugo found this remarkable, ordering everyone to search through the whole library to find the book that matched the page. The book was A Lurking Ambush. The same one that Vikir was holding. The book contained the 10th technique that the ancestors had written. Further recalling that Hugo had gone crazy for the 10th technique and released the hounds to find the remaining 6 pages that contained the technique. Hugo realized that the pages were hidden in the 7 great families, declaring war on them and sending hounds to those that refused. After sacrificing many hounds, all pages were given to Hugo. The reward for doing so was Vikir's death. Vikir grew angry as he recalled those unpleasant memories as he holds the book, knowing that once Hugo achieved the 9th technique it resulted in piles of hound corpses and blood. He makes sure that it won't happen in this life. The pages that Hugo got were all given by Vikir, allowing him to remember the content that was written on each page and that the reason he could not go past the 4th technique was the lack of access to the original book. Vikir reads the book, realizing that without the other pages, the book made no sense, but the moment you had all the pages, the book would turn into a masterpiece. He reminds himself of his past strengths as he reads the book, knowing that before he turned 15 he had to reclaim the power he had before his regression. Night turns to day as Vikir immerses himself in reading the book. He closes the book, having read enough. Wondering if he had read the whole day, but thanks to that he was able to memorize the book's contents from start to finish. He looks around and does not feel the presence of the guardian knights. He closes his eyes and imagines a figure standing before him. His arm glows with a red aura. He opens his eyes and strikes the figure before him using the 1st technique. Continuing the strikes and moving on from the 1st to the 2nd technique and more. He grits his teeth as he thinks of his past self as pathetic. He worked hard to reach the highest level of graduator aura but was unsuitable to learn a proper sword technique, making the direct bloodline hostile to him. The main reason was that he was an illegitimate child. He dashes to the side of the figure once again, asking if they thought he would live the same way again. As he approaches the figure, it transforms into the older version of Hugo. Vikir slices Hugo relentlessly and exits the imaginary space. Breathing hard, he looks at his hand, thinking he was still weak and if he actually drew out the 5th tooth. He clenches both his fists in victory at the feat he had just done and felt happy to the point that he almost cried. He continues to look around, wondering if a sword was nearby to test the 5th technique again. Breaking records in Baskerville history, a young hound's canine teeth bared towards his master were growing. Finally succeeding in drawing the 5th tooth, Vikir believes that he could reach the level he was at as long as his mana could support it. Smiling happily, he notes that his mana capacity had increased and reached another level. A red liquid aura covers his hand, showing signs of a graduator. Vikir had gone from a high-class sword expert to a low-class graduator. A point that had taken him 30 years to reach, but he reached it at 8 years old now. Graduators are on a whole different level compared to sword experts as their aura turns from solid to liquid, density increases, and allows for it to be used more freely. Knowing his swordsmanship was better now and that he could reach the 10th technique, meant endless possibilities. Piercing Fong was what he learned before, which was able to make him stronger in a short period of time but had limitations. However, the lurking ambush was the perfect sword technique that could transition between offense and defense with no growth limitations. Vikir places the book near the window, thinking that he could challenge a mid-class graduator and has a 100% chance of assassination and about 50% if they faced head-on. The only problem he had now was how much to show Hugo. He couldn't show too much or too little of his strength as he takes out an object from his pocket. He places it in front of the book, using the sunlight to make a small fire on the book itself. Vikir grins to himself at what he just did. The book is set aflame as he makes it impossible for other to reach the 10th technique and that he was the only one that knew how this time. The guardian knights appear behind him, asking what the smell was. They question Vikir, and he replied that he accidentally left the magnifying glass around and burnt the book. The guards are relieved to hear that only a useless book was damaged. Vikir asks the guards if they should bother with such a small thing since there were bigger problems to handle. The guards agree to keep it a secret if Vikir agrees. Vikir agrees and proceeds to leave. The guards are happy and think of him as a nice person deserving their respect as he walks away with a smile. Vikir appears before Hugo and Barrymore once again. Hugo asks if he had reached enlightenment. He replies sort of. Hugo asks what he had learned, and Vikir mentions that he felt something warm and sharp yet soft and viscous. Both Barrymore and Hugo are alarmed at hearing this. Barrymore wonders if it was an aura. Aura was something that only 15-year-olds could obtain after years of training. Hugo thinks to himself about why he was getting excited for over an 8-year-old and asks Vikir to show him. He accepts happily. An arena is showcased. Many young masters are confused as Vikir is seen standing with a sword. Barrymore asks Hugo how he intends to test his skills. Hugo replies that a monster will be released. The gate opens and a huge orc exits with chains all over its body. It growls loudly with menacing red eyes. Other young masters in the stand are shocked to see it as they wonder if an 8-year-old could take on an orc by himself. Vikir and the orc are standing face to face. Hugo waves his hand, signaling to the knight to remove the orc's chains. It screams out powerfully and rushes towards Vikir. Vikir takes a prepared stance as it comes towards him. With a calm expression, he slices the orc's arm off with a single swing. Everyone was shocked at what happened. The orc is stunned at its wound. Vikir wastes no time and dashes low to swing at its leg. He slices it off in one strike again, causing the orc to fall to the ground. The orc remains confused at what happened to it. Vikir looks back, thinking that the orc was confused about why it was bleeding for the first time and that its regenerative skill won't activate. It was due to the skill of the bloodhound. It overpowered the orc's ability. People in the stands are wondering how he was that strong. Hugo stares, thinking deeply. Vikir looks at him, knowing he was trying to determine what he learned in the library, and proceeds to show him what he wants. Hugo and Barrymore looked alarmed. Vikir had revealed Aura Blade as his sword is covered in a strong red aura. The orc tries to get up, but senses a red presence approaching it. Its head was smashed to bits as Vikir slashes through it like butter with a quick dash and his sword was covered in the aura. Hugo is shocked from his seat from seeing that red aura from Vikir. Barrymore congratulates Hugo on witnessing the birth of a genius, making Hugo wonder if that was it. Barrymore further states he had not seen this kind of talent from the other families. Hugo stops him noting that something was wrong with the orc. Seeing its blood not stopping even though orcs were famous for its regeneration. He pushes Vikir's victory as a result of the orc being weakened while Barrymore wonders why he can't express his happiness. Vikir calls out to his father and asks if there was anything stronger with a smile on his face. Surprising Hugo.
He tells his father to wait, asking with a smile if there was anything stronger than an orc. This shocks the crowd. He thinks that it would be better to show off his power to a certain degree, hoping that his progress will allow him to be separated from Hugo. Hugo agrees with Vikir and asks for a creature that they captured from the Barbarian raid to be released. The beast was starving since then. The crowd is shocked once again. But Vikir looks happy. A troll was his new opponent. It growls at him. Vikir asks Hugo if he could start right away. Hugo says he may. He rushes to the troll. The troll attacks Vikir with a mighty punch. He dodges and is annoyed, and decides to back away from the troll. The crowd is confused by his actions as it was the perfect moment to attack. Hugo agrees with his actions and that it was the right move due to the troll's Regan powers. Vikir continues to dodge its attacks. The troll begins to breath heavy. The crowd calls Vikir a genius at 8 years old and that his plan was to tire the troll out first. Vikir thinks that it's too slow and that he needed to act but is unable to unleash his full power as it would make it troublesome for him. Instead, he decides to use the troll's power against itself as he slices its arm. The troll falls to the ground, holding its bleeding shoulder. The crowd praises Vikir for what he has done. Vikir thinks that the first technique was not enough to slice the troll's thick skin. Hugo asks him to stop as it could become dangerous, but Vikir tells him he was almost done. He realized that he was getting an epiphany and that he'll give up if he can't kill it in the next attack. The troll growls in anger. He releases his red aura, preparing for an attack. The troll yells at him as he stood still. But it realizes something from him. A deadly aura and image was seen as from Vikir. In the next moment, the troll was sliced in half by Vikir as he unleashed the Hound's aura. Everyone is stunned at what happened. Even Vikir was shocked at what he just did. He laughs saying he did it. Hugo and everyone in the arena could not believe what they just saw. A week later in the dining room, Vikir is upset over the food. He turns to look around, realizing that everyone has been avoiding him since the day of the arena battle. But he was happy to see Hugo's stunned face. And that he had only shown a small part of his power to them but was actually more powerful. He had also gained the super speed regeneration skill from the troll. He thinks about the fact that he has been eating more with Beelzebub as the triplets appeared behind him. He readies himself. Vikir asks the triplets if last time was not enough, but them claim it was not what he was thinking. They wanted to tell him he was cool when he defeated the monsters, causing Vikir to spit out his food. The triplets ask if he was okay as Vikir thinks it was some sort of scheme. Just as he was feeling goosebumps at what they said, Butler Barrymore appears, telling him he needs to go to the Patriarch room. Back at the mansion of the Baskerville family, Hugo is seen chatting with the Morgue clan Patriarch, Adolf Morgue. They talk about the annual training event between the families, hoping no accidents would happen. Hugo tells Adolf that it was just a scratch and that the Morgue's children were dramatic. Adolf said it was because they were noble and dignified. The Rion Mage clan, the Morgues, and the Iron-Blooded Sword clan, the Baskervilles. They were not always on bad terms. The Emperor said that magic and swords were a pair. Because of those words, the two families would have annual joint trainings as a sign of good faith between them. However, a ruby mine between the two families' land was discovered, causing a problem of who owns it. Adolf asks if there was a supernova in the Baskerville family that was born with great blessings and skill, and Hugo brushes it off saying it's not a big deal. Adolf is surprised to see Hugo reacting to a complement of a child. He then tells him that the Morgue family also had a genius. He calls for Camu to come in. The doors open and a little girl walks in. Hugo looks at her. Adolf introduces her as his sister's Respinese daughter, Camu. He tells her to greet Hugo, but she remains silent. Instead of greeting, she calls him a thief that stole the ruby mine and that he should give it back. Hugo was angry to hear the word thief. Adolf is surprised at her words, and she told him that it was what he said in the carriage and that the annoying Chin Beard stole the ruby mine. The words annoying Chin Beard further annoys Hugo. Adolf says it was a misunderstanding and Hugo agrees saying she was just a child. But Camu shouts at Hugo to give back the rubies as she doesn't have enough to do research. Enough! Hugo says as he holds back his anger. Adolf holds Camu tightly, asking what Hugo plans to do to the child, as Hugo states that the Morgues didn't teach manners at all. Adolf asks if he was threatening an 8-year-old girl. "I guess the Morgues didn't teach their children to not envy what is others," said by Vikir as he enters the room. Adolf wonders if Vikir was the supernova and realizes that Camu was missing. Camu appears in front of Vikir asking what he just said. Vikir hears her name and recalls her as the Morgue's clan iron-blooded empress, Camu Morgue. She was known as the genius among the genius even in the Morgue clan that raised countless mages. At her peak she killed all monsters and barbarians in the Lenoir mountain by herself, burning them to death on spears, creating her legend. Vikir also remembered that her beauty was captivating. Camu yells at him, saying that the ruby mines were hers and not his. "You sure came a long way just to throw a tantrum," Vikir replies. The leaders notice something. Flames erupt from Camu due to the word tantrum. She tells him that he'll explain why the ruby mines belong to her so that a stupid dog could understand. Vikir simply smiles, saying that would be fun. A replica of ice is made. Everyone in the room was surprised by this. Camu says she'll explain it. Vikir was upset as he expected them to fight. She explains that the ruby mine was located in the area between the Morgue and Baskerville called Joint Security Area, and that the problem was that the entrance was located in the Morgue area but the mine runs underneath the Baskerville area. Adolf was happy while Hugo became upset due to the explanation. Vikir adds on saying that the Baskerville doesn't need to mine the rubies as they were meant for magic ingredients. But he calls her an idiot as no one would allow someone to enter their lands based on a few pennies. Hearing this made Camu angry. She points to the sculpture, pointing to which side belongs to each family. She moves her arm across both areas, asking whose arm is this then? Vikir repeats her question back to her and grabs her arm. "Mine, of course," Vikir says, making Camu blush. She stutters, wondering why she was his. Vikir tells her who said you're mine, much to her surprise. He grabs the knife, shocking Adolf and Barrymore. He smiles while showing the knife, saying that only her arm belongs to him. Both Hugo and Camu are shocked at what he said. Vikir holds her arm high, ready to cut it with the knife. Camu tears up and screams for her uncle to help. Adolf appears behind Vikir in an angry state, telling him to get away from his niece now. He lets go of her arm, allowing her to run to her uncle and hug him. Adolf yells at Hugo, saying what the hell is this matter? Hugo remains silent and turns to Vikir. He tells him that he has gone too far with his joke. Vikir apologizes, saying it was a common joke in the family and that the knife was fake. Adolf was shocked to see that toy knives were given to children as Vikir bows down to him, saying he was sorry. Hugo tells Adolf that he was getting too involved in the children's play and that he had some ideas regarding to the ruby mines that he should hear. He tells them that they should compete in friendly duels first, as Camu tells Vikir that he better watch out and she won't forget this. Vikir simply smiles and nods. The friendly duels between the Baskervilles and Morgues had begun. It was an occasion where children ages 8 to 15 gather and battle it out. However, everyone's attention was headed somewhere else this year. It was the Morgue's clan Camu Morgue against the Baskerville clan Vikir van Baskerville. Using practical training rules was to showcase the duel between the two geniuses of the clans. The bells rings announcing the start of the duel. Camu tells him she won't hold back and begins to cast a spell. Everyone was stunned at this. She was doing quadra casting. Adolf smiles at Hugo as the crowd were amazed that Camu was doing something that was difficult for a 15-year-old. Camu unleashes her attacks, but Vikir dodges them with ease. He tells her she should focus on one spell, but she calls him an idiot who doesn't understand magic. She summons a stone wall just as Vikir reaches her. He simply smashes through the wall. Camu was shocked to see this, wondering if this was the power of the Baskerville basked in the river Styx. She closes her eyes and opens them again, and sees Vikir with his hand out. He flicks her straight in the head, sending her flying. Adolf was surprised to see a flick while Hugo chuckles. Camu asks him why he flicked her and wonders if he was going easy on her. He points to his forehead, saying hers might hurt. and that they should end things before it gets out of hand, but she ignores him and summons 2 stone walls. She laughs at him behind the 2 walls as Vikir wonders if he should just go around it. He decides to play along and smashes through the wall with just his bare hands. Camu is startled to see his hand come from the wall. Vikir now asks her whose arm it was that crossed the wall, and tells her as he flicks her forehead, the stronger individual. He smiles as Camu falls down again from the flick. With a huge red bump on her forehead, Camu holds it and growls at him. She yells at him saying she'll kill him as Vikir dodges the fire spell and wonders that dealing with children is much harder. He continues to dodge her attacks, wondering what he should do to calm her down. Vikir looks behind, wondering if he should let others handle the problem. Another duel was happening right behind them. It was a pair of idiots that keeps casting fire magic and a swordsman that slices magic. He believes that they might be useful as Camu shouts out why he wasn't getting hit. She walks to him asking him not to turn away and to face her. The idiot mage behind begins chanting a magic spell, giving Vikir the perfect moment. He calls out to Camu, telling her that she better have a defensive spell ready as a huge fireball appears behind him. Camu couldn't believe what was in front of her. Adolf shouts no, as a huge explosion is seen. Everyone gathers around the scene of the explosion. They all call out to Camu, shouting her name. Camu hears her uncle's voice in the dust and smoke. She thinks about what to do as she managed to defend against the attack, but something else had happened. The flame spell had burned all her clothes. She knows that everyone can't see her because of the smoke, but once it clears up, she'll be the laughing stock of everyone. She calls out in her mind for someone to help her, and soon a jacket lands on top of her head. Camu was surprised to see Vikir as he tells her to put on his jacket. Covering herself with the jacket, she asks him why he wants to help her. Vikir says he just wants to. She thinks to herself why this idiot would help but notices something. Vikir had been cut by the idiot swordsman attack which still have some more on it. The people enter the smoke and notices something. Vikir and Camu were together. Adolf was relieved that Camu was fine while Hugo remained silent. The crowd realizes that Camu was on the floor, while Vikir was bleeding, and that he was extremely fit based on the muscles on his body, which shows the amount of training he had done. Adolf hugs Camu as she remains silent as she stares at him. Back at the mansion, Hugo asks Vikir how the battle was against the Lady of the Morgue clan. He tells him that he had understood the reason behind the event once again, while Hugo tells him that a battle between a mage and swordsman are different. He further asks why he didn't go for a clear blow, but Vikir tells him that he had no idea on how to deal with a lady. Hugo tells him that he had let his guard down and that the wound on his arm was a lesson. Vikir was shocked to hear that Hugo was worried about him. He remembered from his past that Hugo was so cold, so strict, and so brutal because he had lost his first wife and eldest daughter. But he thinks it's not his problem as Hugo asks him what they should do with the ruby mines. He tells him that they should give it away. Hugo asks why. Vikir explains that the main purpose of the Baskerville clan was to grow its territories and that the monsters and barbarians near the ruby mines are a problem, and that they should utilize the Morgue clan well to deal with those problems, which helps to minimize their losses with the expansion into that region. Hugo tells him that he was right. Vikir further explains that once the Morgue clan claims the ruby mines, all they need was to push the monsters and barbarians into that region, allowing for them to take care of all the problems at once. Hugo likes the idea that the rubies will be bathed in the blood of their enemies and that the Morgue clan will think twice before entering their area. He rubs Vikir's head, telling him that his idea was 90% aligned with his, as Vikir thought to himself that the idea was originally Hugo's idea from the past. Vikir tells him that they needed to keep an eye on the Morgue's movement. Hugo tells him he had increased the number of hounds scouting the area. As they walk further, they encounter Adolf and Camu waiting for them. Adolf asks if they could talk once again before they return, as Camu blushes while hiding behind Adolf. Back at the room, Hugo asks what they wanted to talk about. Adolf tells him he needs to mention one thing. He wanted to discuss other ways to resolve the issues of the ruby mines other than paying for it. Adolf suggests an engagement. An engagement between the Morgue and Baskerville clan. Hugo asks which child did he have in mind. Adolf proposes the eldest son of the Baskerville and the eldest daughter of the Morgue clan, Camu. He praises her saying she was the best. Hugo tells him that the eldest son was 25 and about the age gap. Adolf tells him the 17-year gap is not too big of an issue, but Camu speaks out saying she will not marry anyone weaker than her mother. Adolf tells her that she might remain single all her life due to her condition, but she remains absolute about it. Hugo tells her that this wasn't a buffet of her choosing. She tells him firmly that she has no intention of playing around either and looks in a certain direction. Both Hugo and Adolf look in the same direction. It was Vikir. Adolf couldn't believe what he was seeing. He whispers to Camu, telling her not to think about Vikir as he was just a small fish in a big pond and only had the Van surname. Hugo hears it and is slightly pissed off. He speaks out saying that an engagement should involve the people's thinking, asking Vikir what he thought. Vikir and Camu simply stared at each other in silence. He opens his mouth slowly and tells them that he accepts. Adolf is confused and angry at the bastard, Vikir. Camu is happy to hear that the engagement was not rejected. Hugo tells Adolf that just because Vikir did not have the name Lou, he assures him that he was a talented child. Adolf stands in front of Vikir, judging him. Vikir recounts his memories of Adolf Morgue. He was a six-circle master and one of the strongest in the Morgue clan and a great supporter of his niece. Adolf tells Vikir that not just anyone can be the husband of Camu. He grabs Vikir's shoulder wondering why he wasn't responding and why his body was so sturdy. Vikir tells him that he wasn't listening to what Adolf had said. This surprises Camu and made Hugo chuckle lightly. Adolf laughs and asks Hugo if he could have a deeper conversation with Vikir. Hugo wonders if the mage of the Empire was gonna scold an 8-year-old child. Adolf replies that this was a request as an uncle while Camu tells him he doesn't have to do this. He gave a bombastic side-eye to Camu, telling her she better stay still and that this was bound to happen to someone else eventually. He then asks Hugo for the chance and Hugo agrees. Back at the training arena, Hugo and Camu are standing at the side while Adolf and Vikir are in the arena. Adolf tells him that they will be testing Vikir and wants to see everything he is capable of. Vikir agrees while thinking if he did show everything, Adolf might faint. Adolf casts a spell telling Vikir he will give him a handicap. A pot was being created from a combination of spells. This amazes Camu as Adolf was casting fire, earth and water magic perfectly. He tells Vikir that they would duel with a pot of water on his head, and that if a single drop falls, it would be his victory. Vikir remains silent thinking that this chance was a great way to experience the power of Adolf and what he's capable of. He looks at Hugo, knowing what he thought was the same reason why Hugo accepted this. Adolf calls out to Vikir to start the duel, making Vikir rush out. He closes into Adolf, ready to strike with his sword. Camu is surprised at his action and yells out that he can't run straight towards his uncle as a bright light appears on his face. A shield was casted to block the swing of his sword. Adolf calls out to his niece asking why she told him that and that shield magic was best used against swordsmen. Vikir steps back annoyed. Fireballs are created in the air behind Adolf as he prepares to go on the offense. He sends out the flame magic towards Vikir, making him leap back. Camu tells him that it was unfair he didn't use that magic against her in their duels, while Adolf wonders which side she was on. Hugo thinks of the attack as not something impossible to dodge and decides not to stop them. Vikir thinks that by using his past knowledge and skills, he may cause Adolf to let his guard down, and that he might even be able to kill him. He strikes hard once again against the shield magic, and continuous hits it again and again. Adolf tells him that it'll be the same no matter how many times he hits it as his sword will never pierce through his shield. But Vikir ignores his words, striking the same place over and over again. Cracks begins to form, making Adolf realize that Vikir's swordsmanship and machine-like movement was impressive. But his sword was chipping away as well. A final swing causes the sword to shatter into pieces. Adolf reminds him that he should have considered the durability of his sword and his shield, and that it's good to focus on a single goal, but that depends on the opponent. While those words were said, Hugo and Camu were shocked by something. Adolf continues to say that Vikir was too weak, but before he could finish the sentence, he notices something as well. A piece of the sword has pierced the pot on his head, causing water to flow down everywhere. Adolf was stunned to see a piece of the sword. Vikir flexes on the old man in his fashion. Camu falls for Vikir even harder. She wonders if the victory against his uncle meant their marriage. Hugo was happy to see that Vikir had won. He looks at Vikir van Baskerville, wondering if he had raised a stronger hound than he thought. 7 years later at the Baskerville training grounds. A huge furry beast with horns is growling loudly. It roars out loud, shaking the air around it. But the hounds stood still, unafraid of it. It rushes towards them, making the hounds leap in the air, striking the monster. The hounds surround the beast, as the beast strikes all of them. Staffordshire Baskerville was the shadow hound looking upon them. He shouts out commands and tips on how to kill the beast. When all of a sudden, 3 hounds dash forward past everyone. It was the triplets. They strike the beast easily. They smile happily at what they did. The intruder was amazed at their skills and dark crimson aura which was suited to the Baskerville family as the monster stood in a daze from their attacks. The hounds see the chance and prepare to kill it. Blood is splattered all over the ground. The instructor praises them, telling them that they had become low-rank sword experts and that this marks the end of their 7-year training. He warns that while this monster was caged, even he cannot handle the older ones that were more tenacious, and that the monster they face today will be incomparable to the ones they will face in real life, and that death occurs much more easily than they think. He gives them one final advice: either use your bloodline to overcome it or build experience to survive. He salutes them, congratulating them on their graduation and wishes them good luck in the future. The graduates discuss amongst themselves on which order of the Baskerville they wanted to join, as the family had 7. Each of the order represented a different job, from watching, searching, guarding, assassinating, suppressing, all-out warfare and others. But they soon wonder about a certain someone and what he would join. It was Vikir van Baskerville. Vikir notices that others were looking at him, hearing the rumors that he had killed a larger ox bear than the one they faced and that he was already a high-rank sword expert. He ignores the gossip and thinks that it took longer than he thought. HI's current level was at intermediate rank at the 5th Baskerville technique, but only considering swordsmanship, he had surpassed his past self. But he still thinks his progress was too slow, as Barrymore appears telling him that the Patriarch was looking for him. Barrymore tells him that his assignment had been decided. Back at Hugo's room, Vikir greets him. He asks how he had been. Vikir notices a scar on his nose and asks what had happened. Hugo tells him he got it from subjugating the barbarians on the mountains and that one of the archers got the better of him. Vikir asks if he had captured them, but Hugo tells him no, instead he gave a similar scar her face. Hugo congratulates Vikir as he wonders if he was going to talk about the assignment. He recalls his past life, that there was part of the Pitbull Order and was sent away for 21 months on the Lenoir Mountain, constantly in battle. And that children in the family were split apart, expendable ones were sent to die in battle, while the important one were taught about politics and administration. That was why the 5th technique exists. It allows for the elite members to catch up to the expendable ones in terms of swordsmanship. Hugo calls out to Vikir, telling him to try the lower house of Parliament, which surprises him. Hugo explains that the lower house was to teach him about the politics and business of the Baskerville family. Vikir couldn't believe that Hugo wanted him to take the elite course. He praises Vikir for his achievements and that he was a genius, and that his position will be the deputy consul of the Underdog city, as both consul and deputy consul positions were vacant. He asks if Vikir will accept. He accepts, but says he has to mention one thing. Vikir talks about the incident with the Morgue clan over the ruby mines. And so he requests to borrow something as part of his reward. This shocks Barrymore. He tells Hugo if that his request was too much, he could deny it. But Hugo allows his, with saying he trusts him and that he would not do anything foolish. Vikir tells him he won't do anything to worry him, still not comfortable with him calling Vikir a son. As Barrymore and Vikir leave the room, Barrymore tells something to Vikir. That Hugo treasures him deeply and that was why he did not dispatch him into battle immediately and that this was a form of kinship between them. But Vikir tells him that only happens if he does a good job. He recalls his past memories, where he was betrayed and killed by Hugo, feeling the sensation of when his head had rolled off the guillotine. With deep hatred in his eyes, Vikir promises that Hugo will experience the same sensation in this life. At the Baskerville territory called Underdog, we arrive at a beautiful mansion. A bald man is telling a pair of servants that the mansion and area has to be squeaky clean by tomorrow as the new deputy consult from the Baskerville family will be coming. A servant wonders what kind of person the new deputy would be and hopes that the person would be experienced in business. The servants continue to talk as Vikir walks by, catching their attention. The servant grabs Vikir's shoulder wondering whose kid this belongs to while telling Vikir this was a place you can't just enter. Vikir looks at him and tells him to remove his hand in an instant. He reveals a piece of paper to the servants. Making them realize that he was the new deputy, Vikir tells them to prepare women and drinks to have a party right now as he enters the building. The servants looked at him confused about the party. Drinks and food are seen along with various people drinking and laughing. A man is staring at this scene in disbelief. His name is Chihuahua Baskerville. He was the general secretary of the city of the Underdog and was very upset right now. He stares out the window wondering how ridiculous Vikir was to drink and party on the first day of his assigned job. This was because of the previous deputy who caused him to have a hard time due to the bribes, and now he's holding a party at the workplace. He finally shouts out that Vikir was a troublemaker and that only once the city was in ruins he will get it together. But Vikir appears behind him, asking if he was the general secretary. Chihuahua wonders when Vikir entered the room as they both introduced themselves to one another. Vikir notices something about Chihuahua's name, that he had no middle name. Chihuahua was stunned as he knows that a lack of middle name signifies that he was outside from the family and he was discriminated against because of this. But Vikir tells him that it was nice. This confuses him. Vikir tells him that he had researched him beforehand and knew that he came from Underdog, making he know all the ins and outs of the city. He tells Chihuahua that he knows how hard people like him had worked and that he wouldn't interfere in his work and trust him to do a good job. Chihuahua wonders if this was a new form of harassment, and why Vikir was here when he had asked for a party. Vikir closes the book, stating that the personal laws had no issue but the judicial system had a lot of flaws. This shocked Chihuahua as Vikir read the book extremely fast. He speaks out about the problem was that Underdog had many illegal business owners who were successful, making the underground hold power above the law. But stopping the illegal businesses itself won't solve the problem. Heads of the underground businesses needs to be removed. Hearing this, Chihuahua just remains silent. Vikir continues on as he stares out the window, saying that the job of the deputy consul is to make laws and execute them, and that he respects the laws already in place but wanted to add a new law. Chihuahua asks him why he needed a new law and Vikir replies that he will destroy the underground economy in a week and needed a cause to make and execute this law. Since he was still young and a newly appointed deputy consul, he needs a certain type of performance to make it more convincing. To put it differently, I will lay out the poop for the flies. Chihuahua stares at him wondering what he plans to do in the city. The next day at the Underdog's downtown Dortsmile Street, a crowd was gathered. As Vikir stands in front of them dressed well, the servants and Chihuahua stand behind him, wondering what Vikir was planning to do as he had been standing there since the crack of dawn. Vikir announces himself to the crowd as the newly appointed deputy consul as the crowd wonders what a cute young kid can do. He tells them about the notice behind him and that the laws have been in place for a while, and that even if the deputy changes, the laws will continue to be upheld. The crowd doesn't believe him, thinking that the higher-ups won't do anything and that he was gonna be lobbied pretty soon. Chihuahua yells out at them to mind their manners as Vikir was from the main Baskerville family. Vikir remains silent as the crowd continues to mock him. He grips the stick hard in his hand and raises it up high, grabbing the attention of the crowd. He slams the stick straight into the ground with tremendous power. Everyone around couldn't believe what they saw. He lets go of the stick and announces a special with the authority of the deputy consul. Vikir Special Law Section 1 Clause 1, he will reward 100 million hold to whoever removes the stick. Everyone around was still too stunned to speak. They all shout what? Into the air. As the stick remains in the ground. The new law that Vikir had created. Chihuahua and the servants remained silent, where else the crowd was talking about the reward. Vikir calls out to them asking if there was no one that wants to get the money. But still no one came out. So he increased the money amount. He tells them of the increased amount of reward, but someone laughs as he speaks. A man from the crowd calls it ridiculous and that Vikir wanted to make fun of them. The crowd agrees with the man and tells Vikir to stop messing around and go to sleep. Chihuahua wonder why they were the ones embarrassed instead as Vikir remains silent at their remarks. He asks them if there was still no one. And then decides to increase the amount of reward once again. Telling them that whoever pulls out the stick, they will get the new reward. He looks at them wondering if there is still no one. The crowd wonders what the hell was going on and if this was a joke. They talk amongst themselves wondering if they should do it. But they see a sword on Vikir's waist and wondered if they would get executed if he thinks they were being too greedy. They continue to wonder about the stick, if it was too heavy or if there was trick. Vikir is disappointed that there was still no one while Chihuahua whispers to him that the city didn't have that amount of money. A hand was raised in the crowd. A little girl with snot on her nose carrying a basket of flowers asks if she could try. A man tells her not to do it as she could be killed, but she tells him that her mother was sick and that she had to try something. She laughs and smiles, telling the crowd that if something happens to her, they should take good care of her mother. The old man had no words to say. She stands in front of Vikir and the stick. She thinks that Vikir might not kill her and that they would reward her with a few coins as she was volunteering to make herself a fool. Vikir tells her to pull it out as she hopes to be paid for a basket full of flowers. She bends down and holds the stick tightly, pulling with all her might. A surprised look came to her face as the stick came out. The crowd was surprised to see that it was done. The little girl holds the stick and looks up wondering why she pulled it out easily. As Vikir releases a red aura, and appears to be reaching for his sword. She tears up and closes her eyes, thinking that she would be executed, wondering what the reason was for her execution and who was gonna look after her mother. But a bag appears in front of her. Vikir kneels in front of her and tells her to take the bag of reward money. She holds the bag of money confused and so was the crowd. He looks back at Chihuahua while asking her where her home was and that the rest of the money will be sent along with a guard to protect it. He rubs her head while saying that the law must always be obeyed. Everyone was once again shocked to see this. As the bag reveals a bunch of gold coins. Knowing that the laws will be upheld with the new deputy, the citizens were happy. Even crime rates were halved. Vikir praises the handwriting of Chihuahua's as he wrote the Eastern language. Chihuahua tells him that he has never been touched since the past 20 years that he had worked here, as Vikir tells him that the stick was the idea to grab the attention of the citizens and to leave a lasting impression. Chihuahua vows to follow Vikir for the rest of his days as Vikir tells him to calm down. But the truth was, Camu was supposed to do this act in the future, but because of fear the citizens never liked her. He rolls out a map saying that the problems are only just the beginning and since they used up their money for the reward, they needed a way to get it back. He marks out spots that held illegal groups and where they might hide in the future so as to confiscate their dirty money. Chihuahua looks at the map wondering how he knew where the criminal businesses was. Vikir tells him that he could smell it but it was acutely because of his regression. Chihuahua thinks of him as a flawless man for investigating this much already as a man opens the door. The man informs them that the Young Autonomy Association has requested a meeting, which was what Vikir had expected. Chihuahua explained to Vikir that the group was made up of several clans but was just a social club, that the young masters were above the law and had something to say about the Vikir special law. Vikir tells them that the dung flies have started to smell the shit. He shows a grin and tells them if they should start to annihilate the pests that are eating away at the city. a club that was located within the high-end hotel in the Underdog city called Burning Suspension, there was a party. The people in the club were the 7 crucial members of the Youth Autonomy Association. They were the second and third generation of the 7 families located within the Baskerville territory. The blonde guy tells the servant to like the drinks spilled on the table, and they thank him for being able to enjoy this precious drink. He tells the others that no matter how much they spent, the money will keep replenishing thanks to the Baskervilles. A man raises a glass, saying it was easy to kidnap barbarians to sell as the demand for slaves continues to grow as the Baskerville only cared about territorial expansion. They talk about how this club was better than the ones in the capital and that even the Baskervilles were protecting them as their personal hunting dogs. The blonde man calls the Baskervilles as idiots with swords as they had caused them to take the blame as they destroyed a loyal clan called the Mesamadunaro clan. And thanks to that incident, there were only 7 clans now. They continue to talk about the new deputy. The blonde man asks if they had heard of his name before and that he had caused a scene when he first arrived at the age of 15. He thinks they should have some fun and teach Vikir a lesson. They think about bringing Vikir here and making a huge and expensive party, and once it's over, make him pay for everything. But say it was a joke so he won't bother them ever again. A servant appears in the room bringing out the female escorts. But one of them notices Vikir and wonders if someone had ordered a male escort. The servant grabs his hair asking him what he thinks he was doing here, as Vikir looks at him with murder in his eyes. A loud snapping sound was heard in the room. The servant was confused as his arm was in a weird shape. He screams in pain as the members wonder what happened. Vikir introduces himself to them, and they realize who he was. They asked what the deputy was doing here, and Vikir tells them they called him here. They greeted him in a nervous manner. As they whisper to each other, wondering if they should do the plan now. Vikir places his hand on the table, telling them to stop the pointless chatter. He releases a red aura, grabbing the attention of the members. Glasses shake all around. The tower of drinks vibrate. And finally exploded. They realize that he used mana manipulation to force the champagne tower to explode by touching the table, making him a graduator class. They continue to whisper among themselves, shocked to find out that he was graduator class at 15 years old. Vikir calls out to one of them and grabs his shoulder as he tells Vikir that they were gonna pay for the drinks. But Vikir leans into him telling him that they should pay for their drinks and wondered if they were planning to force him to pay for it. The rest of them tries to calm Vikir down, saying they wouldn't make him do such a thing. And that they were just testing him as the city was a corrupt place. But Vikir strikes them in the stomach. With his fingers deep inside the body as it bleeds, he tells them that a dog should never trust their owner no matter the situation. And that they act this way because they have never seen something truly frightening before. As he throws the guy onto the floor, he steps on his face, asking the others if they knew why he did this to him. And they tell him that they knew why he did this. But Vikir continues to step on his head, and tells him that they would understand what he wants to do next as he smashes the guy's head to pieces. They all stand up asking Vikir if he thinks that he will get away from this while calling him a bastard. Vikir leans face to face to another guy as he knew they wouldn't understand. He lists out their crimes: abduction, kidnapping, illegal slave trafficking, insulting Baskerville, and a bunch of other crimes. He smacks the guy in the face, saying that animals don't learn until you teach them. He looks at them with a sadistic smile as his eyes glow, telling them that they were gonna see what he can do to teach a disobedient creature a lesson. Deep in the underground dungeon, Vikir and Chihuahua are looking at something in disgust. A hand is seen on the bars, telling Vikir if he thinks he would survive after pulling such a stunt, and that he would tell his father everything. It was the blonde man. He tells Vikir that he will get out of here and kill him. Chihuahua asks Vikir why he had them beaten so much. Vikir asks him if he thinks this was too much. Chihuahua said that he can't turn people into a meat bag, but Vikir tells him that he hasn't even started yet. He walks towards explaining that the village hall was to manage wicked people, but they had turned it into a hideous organization, and based on their arrogant expressions, they still lack proper education. Vikir tells them that once the sun set, he will execute all of them, shocking the blonde man. Chihuahua asks Vikir if he was serious, and Vikir said he will bury those that associate with them. Hearing this, Chihuahua advises him not to do it as their family will fight back. But Vikir tells him not to worry as their crimes are tied to the criminals of Underdog City and that he had his ways. This confuses Chihuahua. Vikir looks at them and informs them of their charges: human trafficking, kidnapping, bribery, blackmail, threatening, assault and murder. The blonde man tells him that they didn't do those crimes, so Vikir asks if they would accept punishment if there was evidence. Looking at them hard, he tells them they look like they did the crime but have no proof. This causes the man to stutter. Vikir thinks deeply what to do, as a man enters carrying a bag. The bag was covered in blood and had a knife sticking out. The man tells Vikir that his custom order was ready. Vikir tells him great timing and good job. The bag revealed a bunch of tools covered in blood. The man asks Vikir where he got the ideas for the tools because for the past 30 years, he had never seen such scary tool. Vikir tells him they were common tools from where he came from. The man asks if Vikir came from hell, but Vikir asks if he wanted to learn, but the man declines, saying he would vomit when he sees the work with those tools. Vikir looks at the tools, remembering that he learnt these tools from torturing demons during the era of destruction. He removes his jacket, frightening the blowed man. He asks them as they stare at him, "Where's that expression of yours that said you won't admit to anything no matter what?" Vikir rolls up his sleeves telling them not to say anything, so he could relieve his cherished memories of his past for once. Rumors spread throughout the town of the 7 members' arrest. The people discuss about the arrest, thinking that the deputy would let them go. Some think that he was going to execute them, but others believe that he would not as it would cause trouble. They believe that the situation was just a political play between the new and native politicians. As the citizens predicted, the 7 families sent an apology to the new deputy consul. The local powerhouses had bent their will, making it possible for the prisoners to be released and the new deputy to be punished by the Patriarch. But something else happened. The 7 heads were hung in the middle of the center square. The heads were preserved with salt, displaying expressions of agony as if they experienced excruciating pain until their last breaths. A notice was hung behind the heads, explaining the crimes of the heads and their execution details. The citizens were speechless upon seeing the heads. Vikir tells Chihuahua that this was expected because of the laws, and now new change will come to the city. Seeing this will soon cause a bloodbath in the Underdog City, Vikir tells Chihuahua to brace himself. Chihuahua was confused on how he would play a part, as he was now wearing a mask. He turns around, whispering if this was the right strategy. A figure asks if he didn't trust him, but he still wondered if this was the right plan, as the deputy consul was trapped in the cage, with people in masks all around the place and people in chains, and that he was going to be sold as a slave for the strategy. They were somewhere on the outskirts of the Underdog City. The slave auction was being conducted, which was an unlawful event that had not been reported. A man welcomes everyone to the circus. He was surprised to see people from the Mont Blanc clan. Reading the note, he sees that they were sellers and Chihuahua assures him that they were selling. He questions Chihuahua if he was not happy with the slaves from before, as the Mont Blanc clan always bought large amounts of slaves. But seeing Vikir's red eyes and black hair, he assures Chihuahua that he will take responsibility and sell him at a good price. He hopes that Chihuahua has a good time at the circus. The auction begins in the main tent as night falls. The people discuss about the slaves that were popular and what they wanted to buy, as the clown man tells them that an item was secretly embezzled by the Baskerville family's knights. It was an A-rank monster that is said to have 19 hearts, the Merciel. From its leather meat, bones and intestines nothing goes to waste. The price starts at 100 million gold. The price increases till the prize was sold for 250 million gold. The auction continues as the people bid and buy things. A man approaches Clown Mask, as he was surprised they were gonna sell something this time. He announces to everyone that something special has arrived and was found deep within the jungle. It was the Barbarian of Balak from the warrior tribe in the L'Orange mountain jungles. He tells them they would get a different feeling when they tame a wild slave and it would be the perfect chance to test their slave training techniques, but he wonders why they had decided to sell this thing. He calls out for a bid but no one responds. He then decides to lower the bid from 5 to 1 million. But still the people were not interested. He tells the huge man to get rid of it as no one wanted it. But the warrior struggles to free itself. So the huge man punches her hard, making her unconscious. He apologizes for the disturbance as they bring her to the back. As an apology he decides to bring out the best product they had today. Vikir walks in, catching the attention of everyone. He was wearing long hair as a disguise. The clown mask introduces him as a rare item with black hair and red eyes and looks for a high price. The people bid heavily amongst themselves, starting from 600 million gold, which surpassed what the clown mask was looking for. They argue among themselves as the bid kept on increasing to 900 million. But a single number raised the bid to 6 billion. This amount stuns everyone in the room. They see the man as Baron Gambino from the granary, and that he had taken over the underground, allowing for him to gain immense wealth and power. The lady asks him if he was spending too much, but he tells her he can sell him at a higher price in the capital, but she tells him that 6 billion was too much, and he tells her to be quiet. He scolds her for talking back and to try arrogantly bite the hand that feeds her, so she remains silent. The masked clown asked if there was anyone else that wanted, but no one replied, hence Vikir went to Gambino. Gambino looks at Vikir thinking that he looked better up close. He tells him not to be nervous as he wasn't a bad man. As he pants heavily, telling him that he has thought of many ways to play with Vikir. Vikir raised his arms and pulls the chain hard, breaking the chains in a swift manner, shocking the lady and Gambino. He lifts his foot up and smashes the ground to the point Gambino flew up like a little bitch. He lands hard onto the ground. Vikir grabs his back asking if he wanted to play shield and spear. Squeezing hard till he bleeds, Vikir tells him that he should be the shield to see if he can endure. Gambino screams in pain, telling Cindy to get the security. But more blood gushed out, stunning her. Vikir made him faint. As he removes his fake wig, Cindy realizes who he was. He was Vikir van Baskerville. Seeing him shocked everyone in the crowd. Vikir tells him that the name Circus fits this place, and tells everyone that they won't return in one piece. Vikir reveals himself to everyone attending the circus. Clown Mask couldn't believe that he was here. He tells the guards to kill him as he had no weapon with him. But Vikir had Beelzebub's skill. He cuts down the guards easily. Clown Mask notices the red and horrific aura as the huge man swings a weapon as Vikir rushes towards him. The weapon comes close to Vikir's face, but he simply smiles at it. The guard is surprised at this as blood is seen. Vikir cuts through the weapon and the huge man, as he was a graduator. The huge man wonders how someone at that age was a graduator level. The Clown Mask knew that the graduators were the ultimate weapons and that they had no chance. Chihuahua was also surprised at Vikir's strength, but he notices something. Clown Mask shouts at Vikir to look over here. He tells Vikir to drop his weapon and to surrender so that Chihuahua does not lose his life. But Vikir remains silent, so Clown Mask asks him if he could not understand what he was saying. Chihuahua struggles but yells out to Vikir that he was alright and to look after himself. Clown Mask tells him to stop struggling, but Chihuahua continues to speak out, telling Vikir that things like injustice and compromise does not exist for him, and that he would rather die than be a burden to his superior. Vikir laughs at this, saying his loyalty was great. He tells him not to worry because he had received a trump card from the Patriarch, showing them a whistle. Vikir takes a deep breath in and blows hard into the whistle. The sound of the whistle stuns everyone in the room due to the sharp and loud noise. Vikir stops blowing and stares at them. Clown Mask soon chuckles nervously as nothing had happened. He tells him that even a graduator can't do anything here, but something enters his throat as he looks down. A figure appears behind him. As he falls, Chihuahua screams as the man sheathes his blade. A man asks who the figure was as he tries to attack him. But the figure slices the man in three like pie. Blood flies everywhere as the crowd screams, but Vikir simply smiles. Soon a bunch of men enters the room. Wearing hoods and swords, their very presence silenced the room. They stare with an intense look. The guards and Cindy see them, and slowly began to realize who they were. The Empire's most brutal night order known as the Annihilation Experts, who were all graduators. Cindy knew them as the Baskerville clan's Pitbull Night Order, just as one of them came from behind her. She turns and sees him, thinking that she can't die in a place like this. But Vikir appears, telling the man to leave her alone. He obeys and leaps back to kneel, as Vikir tells them to rip the rest to shreds and kill the ones not lying down obediently. The men obeys Vikir's command and disappears. Vikir recalls that Hugo was sensitive about military power and was relieved he could use the pitbulls without trouble. The pitbulls continue to slaughter the people as one of them thinks to get on the floor and run away once it quietens down, but a pitbull sees him. He tells the pitbull he would wear the handcuffs, but the pitbull tells him that they don't carry handcuffs. Instead, they sliced off the legs of those they capture. A cigar is lit as the man says that those who are to be executed won't need their legs. As a man wearing sunglasses appears beside Vikir, he asks Vikir how it felt to command the Pitbull Knights. The man was the commander of the Pitbull Knights, Boston Terrier Le Baskerville. He looks at Vikir and sees why his brother Hugo was so interested in him, as Vikir was already fierce and cruel at the age of 15, so he rubs his head, telling him to come to the Pitbull Knights so he can raise him properly. Vikir tells him he would think about it. Vikir shrugs him off, telling him he had something urgent to attend. This makes Boston want Vikir even more, and Vikir thinks of him as burdensome. Vikir enters a room filled with various cages, thinking that what he wanted was around here. He looks at a safe knowing that it contained the money that the nobles were paid with, which will be given to the city hall to be taxed, and soon notices a certain cage. He pulls out the cover and sees something. A voice for moaning in pain. It was the female barbarian that was being auctioned. She moans in pain as tears fall from her face. Vikir took a closer look at the barbarian girl. Seeing that she was tormented before being dragged here, making him angry. He tells her she was lucky as he reveals a red and blue potion on his waist, and that he was giving it to her out of kindness. She drinks the potion and its effects are seen on her body. All of a sudden, she awakens. And dashed to the back of the cage, as Vikir asked her why she was so surprised. She looks at him in wonder as all her wounds have healed. Vikir tells her to go in her language. She slowly comes out the cage, as Vikir points to the exit, while still telling her to run away in her language, as he knew the basics of her language from fighting the barbarians countless times in the past. But she yells out a bunch of words that Vikir couldn't understand as he was not that fluent. But before she left the place, she turns to Vikir and spoke something in her language. Vikir believes that she was thanking her, and began to look for what he came here for and found it. It was the Merciel's corpse that was being auctioned before. Beelzebub suddenly became active. It screams out loudly, as it has been a while that it had feasted on an A-rank monster, so Vikir tells it to quickly consume the corpse before the Pitbull order arrives. Beelzebub was happy. Soon, rumors of what happened at the circus spreads in the town, and that nobles and participants were taken to the Underdog city prison with their limbs torn off. And that day, the building burned. And the entire club of burning suspension burnt down and disappeared. With the heads of the club's VIPs were put on display, which created more awareness towards criminal acts. The 7 families who lost their children sent letters of protests to the administrative office. But the reply they received was firm, that the death penalty was given to the criminals involved with the Imperial's family most forbidden act, illegal slave trading. And that the bank drafts, ledger books and other evidence were found by the Baskerville family and will be reported to the Imperial family. Soon, the patriarchs of each of the 7 families came. They kneeled down and apologized, which was unprecedented as they were begging their enemy who killed their sons. However, Vikir's reply was simply that due to the investigation, the 7 families' assets will be confiscated. And on the charge of treason, 3 generations will be destroyed. Soon, the floor of the execution ground were filled with the dirty blood of the city's corrupt vermin. This resulted in love from the citizens as crime and employment rates were lowered, making the welfare of Underdog's city restored. The next day, Chihuahua tells Vikir he had brought him coffee with a smile on his face. Vikir tells him to do his job and not bring coffee, but Chihuahua tells him that it was a sign of thanks for saving him from Clown Mask. Vikir tells him he was being stingy by bringing him just coffee, but Chihuahua assures him he also placed 2 spoons of sugar, creamer, and a little bit of water. He then asks Vikir how his transcribing training was going, so Vikir asks him to check his progress. Chihuahua was impressed with Vikir's writing as he was very good, but Vikir tells him that he still has a long way to catch up. Thinking deeply, Chihuahua was amazed by Vikir's acts of being able to create new laws from the words he learned, and was able to comprehend knowledge of law easily. He thinks that if Vikir stayed here, Underdog City will develop even more. Night arrives, as the moonlight reaches between the bars. A person is handcuffed. Vikir tells Cindy that he was sorry for not visiting her sooner as he was busy with things lately. He asks her if her real name was Cindy Wendyson Rose, but she asks him why he let her live. He removes the blindfold, telling her that he wants to ask her a few questions. She stares at him asking if questions were why he let her live. Vikir turns away, asking her if she was the reason why Baron Gambino was able to grow his power so quickly, but she remains silent. He pulls out a chair, telling her that her ability to earn money was impressive, and had she grown her talent in other places, she would have become a great merchant or banker. Then he promises her that once she answers his questions, he will let her go. But if she doesn't, she will regret her actions today. She agrees to answer his answer, so Vikir asks her if she thinks he has been enforcing the law well. He tells her to answer seriously or he won't keep his promise. This makes her upset. She tells him that he was doing well. The reply makes Vikir grin widely. He walks over to her slowly, grabbing her attention. As he slowly raises his hand towards her, lifting her face close to his as he looks her straight in the eyes, and asked her what the reason was. Vikir was staring intensely. She trembled with fear as sweat drips down her face as he slowly lets go of her face. He walks back to the chair, wanting to hear from her what he was doing wrongly. She grits her teeth, hesitating to answer. But she explains anyways, that a consul's important factor was virtue, and that even though his laws had reduced crime, many citizens will soon die and suffer from those laws. In the long term, it will cause hatred and rage from the people. Furthermore, the Baskerville family will also not welcome him, as he is gaining too much power than the clan leader in Underdog City. Vikir adds on, saying that eventually he will be hated by the people, and even become a threat targeted by the Baskervilles. So he looks at her and asks her what he should do. She tells him to return all the power and achievements to the clan leader, and that he needed to stop getting attention by going to the Lenoir Mountain or the Academy in the Empire, to hide his powers and wash his identity. And when the time comes, the Baskerville clan leader will be the one to suffer in his stead. Vikir hears this and remains silent. But soon she felt an immense pressure as Vikir asks her that what she said means that she wants the hunting dog to bite off his own owner's neck as Hound Shadows emerges. He stares at her with immense power. But she does not relent easily. She furthers tell him that as a hunting dog, this was the only way for him to avoid hatred, bringing a smile to Vikir's smile. He tells her that she would keep that in mind, surprising her. Vikir takes out a key, telling her it was good advice and was almost identical to his own idea. He removed the handcuff, telling her she was free, but she was hesitant, but Vikir assures her he always keeps promises. She turns to leave, telling him she hopes that the day he regrets what happened today never comes, but before she leaves, Vikir asks her if she knew the clan Mesamadunaro, which stops her in her tracks. He goes on to tell her that the clan were merchants who were rich and were once the 8th clan. But an unfortunate event caused the clan to end. Hearing this made her grip her fist tight. Vikir recalls the history that the young master of the Mesamadunaro clan wanted to show off his sword skills in his birthday celebration. The demo started and the people couldn't believe what they were seeing. The young boy was showing off the secret Baskerville sword techniques that only members knew. This later reached the ears of the leader of the Baskerville family, confirming that top-secret information had been leaked, releasing the hunting dogs of the family, causing the Mesamedunaro clan to go extinct. But the truth was, it was the young demons of the Seven family that made the young master learn the stolen techniques. Cindy smiles awkwardly, asking Vikir what that story had to do with her. Vikir continues the story, saying that there was a survivor from the clan, that the Seven idiots had sneaked out a 1-year-old girl from the devastation. All because the girl was beautiful. She went through cruel and unusual torture, acts so horrible that even Vikir couldn't talk about it. Hearing this made Cindy grit her teeth hard. She turns to leave, telling Vikir she doesn't want to hear anymore, but Vikir tells her there was more to the story. And time passed, and a new deputy came to the city, managing to drag out the old problems out of the city and punish them, as the trigger for everything was the Seven idiots. And that the new deputy made sure that the Seven idiots were tortured properly and they admitted their crimes as they met their end, making them say their last words. "I'm sorry for committing such a heinous crime," or so they say. Hearing this made Cindy tear up as she turns to look at Vikir. She yells at him, wondering who the hell they were saying sorry towards. And Vikir tells her that the sorry was meant for the young girl using the fake name Cindy Wendyson Rose, the sole survivor of the Mesamedunaro clan, but Cindy could not believe him, telling Vikir how she was supposed to believe him when he tortured them. Vikir grabs a torch, telling her that it would be easier for her to see with her own eyes. They reached a certain cell, where he told her to take a look. Tears fall from her eyes, as she was alarmed from what she saw. Bodies and walls were covered in blood everywhere in the cell she looked in. Words were written on the floor with blood, as the Seven idiots confessed, saying they were sorry and begged for forgiveness. The scene before her made Cindy throw up. Vikir walks towards her, saying there was still one clan left to hate, and tells her to hate the Baskerville clan. She had more than enough rights to do so. She wipes her mouth, staring at him. She asks him why he was helping her even though he was part of the Baskerville clan, but Vikir tells her she was asking the wrong question. She pauses for a moment, then tells him she understands what he was trying to say. She stands up, telling him that she will repay this debt. As she makes her exit, she tells him that whatever he does for the rest of his life, he will never worry about money ever again. This brings a smile to Vikir's face, as he tells her that he will remind her of this promise in the future. The next day, back at the mansion, Chihuahua greets Vikir good morning, but was shocked to see blood and dead bodies in the room. Vikir wakes up, rubbing his eyes and saying good morning to Chihuahua. Chihuahua asks him what was with the bodies and blood. Vikir tells him that he killed them in his sleep. They continue the talk as Chihuahua asks Vikir what his childhood was like. But Vikir tells him that a lot of inconveniences were happening in his way lately. There were poison arrows, poison drinks, acid, snipers, arson, getting run over by a cart and many more. Vikir wonders if this meant he was getting more attention as Chihuahua calls him insane. But it was thanks to his 3 skills that he was able to survive all these attacks. And thanks to the river of Styx and tough life enhancing his body, graduator-class assassin couldn't pierce his skin. Vikir thinks of all this as annoying and wants to look into it. Chihuahua tells him it was a wise decision. Soon a carriage carrying the Baskerville flag appeared in front of them. Vikir recognizes them were sent by the main family. The carriage door opens, and a pair of feet appears. Chihuahua is shocked to see who came out, as a white head appears. It was Barrymore the butler. He greets Vikir saying it has been a long time. Vikir tells Barrymore that he looks better now. They continue to talk as Chihuahua looks at Barrymore in disbelief. Barrymore was famous as being able to survive in the main family as a single mistake could cost him his life, and that he was the head butler for 4 generations. Chihuahua was happy to see the role model of servants in front of him. Vikir asks Barrymore if the reason he came was for that. Barrymore agrees, saying that Hugo was happy with his results and wants him back at the main residence. Vikir thinks of Hugo, not believing that his face meant being happy. Hugo is seen reading about Vikir in the paper, and that he had achieved first place as the most beloved figure of Underdog City. He reads a quote out loud to Vikir that states, the Baskervilles are only good at using weapons and not their brains, but with Vikir's achievements, they could get rid of that image. Hugo praises Vikir, but Vikir tells him he was doing what he was supposed to, still thinking if Hugo's face is his actually happy face. Hugo then tells him that one must reward and punish according to the situation. He informs Vikir that he was the one to go to the academy this year as Vikir expected. The best academy Colosio was where the Empire's elites gathered. It was the perfect opportunity for Vikir to grow stronger without Hugo's attention. Hugo asks Vikir if he wanted any other siblings to go to the attend with him. Vikir tells him that he was close to the triplets but was actually thinking of using them as sandbags. Hugo tells him he would send them with him and asks if he remembers the plan he thought of when he was 8 years old. Vikir remembers the plan regarding the ruby mines with the Morgue clan to use them to get rid of the barbarians. Hugo smiles, telling him that the plan had worked. Vikir asks what he meant by that and Hugo explained, saying that the Morgue suggested a joint raid and were humble about it. And Vikir should inspect the territory before going GTO the academy, and if the laws he had altered were being upheld. Vikir bows down and tells Hugo he will follow his orders. Back at Underdog City, Chihuahua waves a cloth in the air, calling out to Vikir. He tells him to take care, and that he will do his best with all the work in the meantime. Vikir turns back in silence, thinking that he will soon part ways with Chihuahua. As he continues the march, Vikir speaks out loud, telling someone to show himself. A group of hooded figures appears suddenly behind Vikir's convoy. One appears beside him, as Vikir apologies to the hooded figure for making him wait. The man was Staffordshire Baskerville. He tells Vikir it was okay and that their job was to escort him safely. Vikir asks him if Uncle Boston Terrier was doing well, and Staffordshire tells him that he wanted Vikir to join the pit bulls after the slave auctions. Vikir thinks of his uncle as someone who makes him uncomfortable. They soon reach a mountain. Looking at the mountain, they wonder if this was the region they lent to the Morgue clan. Vikir looks around, noticing that nobody was breaking the laws. Staffordshire tells Vikir that a team was sent to inspect before, but Vikir knew that they were really meant to get rid of the barbarians. He informs Vikir that the Morgue clan had formed a huge group showing that they were serious. On the other hand, the Baskervilles had only sent a small group with Vikir. But Vikir thinks it was a good idea by Hugo to see the barbarians' lifestyle. A fortress is seen deep in the mountain. Skeletons were seen with spikes coming out of it. Vikir sees it as a mage's warning to the barbarians, a very scary message. The act reminds Vikir of the little girl from the Morgue's clan. 3 figures stand on top of the fortress. They shout who goes there, catching the attention of Vikir and Stafford. They were girl triplets, who tells them that no one can pass without their permission. Vikir knew who they were. They were the Morgue clan 3 flowers, the triplets, Hysis, Middlesis and Losis. The author is lazy in naming triplets. Each of them were insane. Combined together, their insanity could reach the heavens. Vikir tells them that they were the envoy team from Baskerville. He explains to them that they came to inspect the area and to open the gates, but they wave him off, saying they had to report to the person in charge, and that a reply will come tomorrow. Vikir asks them what rights they had to stop him from entering the land he owns, but the triplets look down on him, asking if he was looking down on them because they were paying rent. The triplets asks Vikir if he knew about the tenant's law, which was his family's law, causing Vikir to have a headache. Red aura glows from his hands as Stafford notices. Vikir tells them that he made changes to that law, so that he could chase tenants he didn't like. "I'll say it for the last time," Vikir said, as the triplets begin to look nervous. "Open the gates," Vikir said with intense pressure as he stares at them with murder in his eyes. The triplets all cower in fear from his words alone. One of them grits her teeth, casting a spell, saying they heard a psycho kid took charge of Underdog City, unleashing the spell towards Vikir, saying they had dealt with such kids before. The spell lands near Vikir, scaring his horse. The triplets yell at Vikir for being a stupid swordsman and that he can't enter the Morgue's land without permission, pissing Vikir off even more. Stafford reaches for his sword, telling Vikir he thinks that this can't be resolved with words. Vikir agrees with him. but three hooded figures from the back shouted back, saying what absurdity coming from girl who don't even know their place. This alarmed Vikir. He turns around, recognizing a voice as sweat drips down his face. The girls shout at them, saying they were mere underlings and if they think their ranks were higher than theirs. The three hooded figures jump in front of Vikir, saying not us. They removed their hoods, revealing themselves as the triplets of the Baskerville family, with the same names as the girls, point to Vikir as the symbol of the Baskerville family. They look at Vikir, winking and showing thumbs up, telling him to leave the girls to them. Vikir gave them a certain look, like what the actual F is going on here. As his annoyance is raised to the power of 2, Vikir found himself puzzled, questioning the identity and intentions of the individuals standing before him. Their peculiar behavior left him bewildered and curious, seeking to understand the situation at hand. Highborough glanced back at Vikir, expressing his gratitude for recommending them to the academy. He signaled to Vikir that he should leave this situation in their capable hands, implying that they were capable of handling it themselves. As Vikir's thoughts raced, he started piecing together the puzzle before him. It became clear that the group's actions were driven by their affiliation with the academy. However, Vikir couldn't help but see them as mere sandbags, lacking independent judgment but able to effectively carry out orders. Aware of the triplets' future as skilled warriors, Vikir believed that with his training, they could become valuable assets. With a smile, he expressed his intention to trust the triplets, affectionately referring to them as his older brothers. Upon receiving Vikir's affirmation, the Baskerville triplets displayed signs of joy and satisfaction, pleased to have earned Vikir's trust. Morgue's 3 flowers, who had observed this exchange, expressed disdain for the close bond among the Baskerville triplets, labeling them as ignorant fools who relied solely on each other. Unfazed by the taunts, the Baskerville triplets responded defiantly, raising their middle fingers in a cheeky manner, asserting that it was Morgue's 3 flowers who were the true fools. The tension escalated as Morgue's 3 flowers, fueled by anger, vowed to discipline the Baskerville triplets for their insolence. Vikir's thoughts shifted as he recalled his past knowledge. Before his regression, he had known the Morgue triplets as powerful mages with water, earth, and nature attributes. Their combined magic abilities exponentially enhanced the effects of their spells, earning them the title of the Morgue's 3 flowers. As the Morgue's 3 flowers merged their magical abilities, a colossal vine made of soil and plants emerged, creating a formidable barrier. Hysis, positioned atop the wall, burst into laughter, mocking the Baskerville triplets with her taunts. Middleborough and Lowborough turned to their adversaries, questioning if they could overcome the obstacle. Undeterred, Highborough readied his sword, dismissing the plant barrier as insignificant. With precision and skill, Highborough executed the Baskerville first technique, effortlessly slicing through the massive vines. Staffordshire marveled at his flawless execution. However, before Highborough could fully recover, he sensed an incoming attack. He managed to block a whip-like strike from the vines with his sword, though the force pushed him backward. Middleborough and Lowborough called out in worry as they witnessed Highborough's predicament. Losis wore a smug expression, mocking the Baskerville triplets and asserting that their swords were incapable of reaching them. The Baskerville triplets responded with intense anger, their expressions resembling hounds ready to hunt their prey. Staffordshire turned to Vikir, asking if he found the situation enjoyable. Perplexed, Vikir questioned what Staffordshire was referring to. Staffordshire explained the ongoing clash between magic and swordsmanship, highlighting the long-standing debate about which was stronger. Magic used surrounding mana to amplify and reproduce elemental powers, while swordsmanship channeled the user's energy and mana for explosive and enduring strength. Staffordshire found pleasure in observing the potential and talents of the clans of mages and swordsmen who would shape the future. Vikir acknowledged his involvement, stating that if viewed from that perspective, he was indeed part of the ongoing conflict. Staffordshire commented that Vikir had already surpassed others his age in terms of skill. Vikir, uninterested in the ongoing fight, expressed his frustration and wished for all of them to perish. He considered it a waste of time, as he had important tasks to attend to, having recently found a supervisor burdened with a significant workload. Suddenly, a figure arrived at the scene, casting a fiery spell and angrily questioning what they were doing in front of their territory. Hyburo took the opportunity to attack Hysis, believing he had the upper hand. However, the situation quickly changed as they noticed a massive fire approaching them. The unexpected turn of events left them taken aback and shocked. A tremendous explosion of fire engulfed the area, causing tension in Staffordshire but eliciting a smile from Vikir, who wondered if everyone had perished. To Vikir's annoyance, he realized that the Baskerville triplets had survived the attack. He looked at them with a displeased expression, making a disapproving sound. Hyburo, in a state of shock, questioned the sudden appearance of fire magic. Middleborough shouted at the figures behind the smoke wall, expressing frustration at the near-death experience they had just encountered. Behind the dissipating smoke, the three flowers of the Morgue clan were in tears. Middlesis, still shaken from the near-death experience, expressed her relief at having survived. Hysis chimed in, acknowledging that if she had dodged the attack even slightly later, she might not have been so fortunate. Losis, scared and seeking comfort, voiced her fears to her older sisters. The person responsible for the powerful fire spell questioned the situation and asked what was going on here. Vikir looked up at the figure who had unleashed the attack. It was Camu Morgue, standing atop the castle gate wall, flames still burning in her hands. Camu looked down and declared her inability to forgive anyone who caused trouble within her managed territory. As she landed in front of Morgue's three flowers, Middlesis tried to explain that their intention was to stop the invader, while Losis added that the fight had been initiated by the other party. Camu cast a cold gaze upon them and questioned their informal way of addressing her as Camu, emphasizing her position as the vice head of the fortress. Middlesis couldn't help but shudder in fear, denying any disrespect and quickly correcting herself, addressing Camu with the appropriate honorific. Camu then pointed towards the treetops where dead skeletons hung, warning them to be cautious if they wished to avoid a similar fate. Middlesis let out a frightened cry and apologized for their actions. Camu noticed Vikir, and her eyes widened in shock. She approached him and remarked that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, recalling that it had been 7 years. Vikir smiled and acknowledged that it had indeed been a while, greeting her as Camu Morgue. Vikir couldn't help but wonder if Camu's more mature appearance was the reason for her increased attractiveness. He mused about the beauty of Camu Morgue, who had captivated the hearts of many men in high society. In his previous life, there had been scandals and rumors surrounding her, as she allured even married men. However, he found it strange that there were no such rumors in this lifetime. Nevertheless, he brushed off those thoughts. Vikir straightforwardly requested Camu to open the door, stating that words wouldn't work on the triplets. Camu was taken aback by his blunt words. She looked angry and questioned if that was all he had to say after such a long time. Vikir gazed at her with curiosity and inquired about what he should say instead. Camu's anger flared, and she exclaimed in frustration. Staffordshire observed Camu's escalating anger and wondered if the next fight would be between the superstars of the two clans. Camu pointed her finger at Vikir, her eyes filled with angry tears, and declared that he scored 0 points. She accused him of having a disrespectful attitude towards his future wife, giving him a score of 0 out of 100. The Morgue's three flowers, the Baskerville triplets, Vikir, and Staffordshire all looked at Camu Morgue with the bombastic side-eye look. Camu averted her gaze to the side, her face blushing, and muttered a huff. Everyone present was left with the same question in their minds: whose wife? Vikir and Camu rode their horses together, making their way toward the fortress. As they traveled, Camu commented on the Baskerville clan's lack of knowledge about the barbarians. Vikir confidently responded, assuring her that they were well acquainted with the barbarians and frequently fought against them. He claimed that their knowledge surpassed that of the Morgues. Curious, Camu questioned Vikir's decision to send the Baskerville triplets, referring to them as young and foolish hounds. Vikir explained that it had been agreed with the Morgue clan to position the main force on the other side of the mountain range. He wondered why Camu was asking about something she already knew. Camu smiled mischievously and playfully suggested that Vikir might not be as well informed about the barbarians as he thought. Vikir, determined to prove himself, retorted that as the person in charge of the delegation, he naturally possessed extensive knowledge. Camu then went to ask him which of the tribes were the most annoying, as Vikir thinks that she just keeps on asking questions. Vikir answered her, by stating it was the warrior tribe Balak and the sorcerer tribe Rococo, as the strength of Balak's bowmanship was on a completely different level to the Empire, and its principles isn't well known either. Camu, teasingly, acknowledged his confidence in his well-informed answer about the ecology of the barbaric tribes and awarded him 8 points out of 100 in her unique scoring system. Puzzled by the points, Vikir questioned their purpose. Camu simply replied that it was because he had answered well. Vikir looked at her with curiosity, intrigued by her unusual scoring system. Camu continued her evaluation of Vikir, expressing her dislike for overly intelligent men and stating her preference for a little foolishness. She playfully critiqued Vikir's choice of a large horse, considering it ill-suited for his shorter stature, and deducted 6 points. Moving on to fashion, she expressed disappointment with his lackluster clothing choices and assigned him a mere 4 points. When she noticed Vikir ignoring her, she playfully gave him just 1 point for his mannerisms. Camu then playfully smiled and awarded his face 99 points. However, due to his poor control over his facial expressions, she playfully deducted 1 point. Growing frustrated, Vikir urged Camu to stop the useless evaluation. Camu questioned why it was useless, asserting that she needed to be stern with her future husband. Perplexed, Vikir asked why he was considered her future husband. Camu reminded him of a test he had passed 7 years ago, when he dueled Camu's uncle to assess his suitability as a potential husband. Camu expressed her dissatisfaction with her uncle's decision and how it had hindered her path to marriage. Reluctantly acknowledging the promise that had been made, she decided to follow through with it, albeit resentfully. While Camu vented her frustrations, Vikir observed her and acknowledged her prowess as a great fire mage. Interrupting her, Vikir declared that he had forgotten about what happened that day and wished to make it as if it never occurred. Camu's face flushed red, and she threw a jacket at Vikir, exclaiming that he couldn't simply reverse something that had happened, and called him a dummy. She boasted about her genius intellect, claiming that once she witnessed something, she never forgot it. Vikir examined the jacket and jokingly wondered if she had returned it without washing it. As they reached the outskirts of the fortress, Camu informed Vikir that the barbarians had ambushed the ruby mine, plundering either the indigenous slaves or the crops. She explained that they took slaves to sell elsewhere. Pointing to a wall built by earth and iron mages over the course of a month, she proudly showcased the skill of the Morgue mages. Impressed, Vikir acknowledged their talent, noting that it would have taken several hundred regular people around a year to achieve the same result. Camu affirmed his observation with pride. Vikir noticed some large holes in the wall and jokingly asked if they were caused by the arrows shot by the Balaks. Camu confirmed that the arrows carried a strong aura and had caused numerous casualties during nighttime guard duty. She mentioned that the arrows were capable of breaking through walls 2 to 3 meters thick, emphasizing the exceptional archery skills of the Balaks. She revealed that her uncle had suffered a severe chest injury from one of these arrows but had luckily survived, albeit with wounded pride. Recalling a similar experience from his own clan, Vikir mentioned that his Patriarch had injured his nose bridge. Curious, Vikir inquired about the talented individuals among the barbarians, and Camu responded that she believed there was a skilled female among them. Due to their black-painted faces, it was challenging to discern their physical traits. As they turned around, a mage approached them, addressing Camu as the vice-head of the fortress. The mage reported that a recon member of the barbarians had been captured and urged them to come quickly. Curious and concerned, Camu and Vikir followed the mage to a tent where the captive barbarian was being held. Vikir observed the barbarian and identified him as a member of the Rococo sorcerer tribe. Camu inquired if any information had been extracted from him. The mage informed them that the barbarian remained uncooperative and resistant to psychic magic due to his strong sorcery, making it impossible to read his mind. Camu then questioned the barbarian about the recent ambush on the Morgue clan's fortress, specifically asking about her cousin, Rose, who had been kidnapped. The barbarian responded with a smile and spoke in his native barbarian language. Camu turned to the mage, requesting a translation to learn about the whereabouts of the barbarian who rebelled. The mage reported that when the barbarians attacked, everyone at the fortress had either died or been taken away. He informed her that, at that moment, there was no one available to translate the barbarian's words. Suddenly, Vikir spoke up, revealing that he knew a little of the Rococo language. Surprised, Camu questioned what Vikir didn't know how to do. Vikir clarified that he was not fluent and only had a basic understanding of the vocabulary. Camu requested Vikir to ask the barbarian about the whereabouts of her kidnapped sixth cousin, describing her as a 12-year-old girl with red eyes, red hair, and white skin. Vikir posed the question to the barbarian in the barbarian language, and the barbarian responded with an evil smile and gave him a short reply. Closing his eyes for a moment, Vikir relayed the grim news to Camu: her cousin was dead. Anger filled Camu's face upon hearing this devastating information. She declared that since the senator of the audience hall was currently being treated and the senator of the temple was away on an inspection, the decision would be made by her, Camu Morgue, a member of the middle house and the vice head of the fortress. She announced the verdict: immediate execution. A spike pierced the barbarian's body, and soon he was consumed by fire. As the barbarian burned, he uttered something, but Camu dismissed his words, stating that after the war, the language he spoke would only be used in hell. The barbarian's companion watched in horror as he met his fiery demise. Filled with anger, Camu turned around and urged Vikir to follow her, leaving him silently observing her departing figure. Exiting the tent, he was greeted by the sight of Camu crying out loud. He walked towards her, recognizing that despite her tough exterior, she was still only 15 years old. Vikir asked her about her close relationship with her cousin, and Camu confirmed that they were indeed very close. She described her cousin as a pure child who didn't fit into the cold-hearted Morgue clan. Vikir tried to console her, saying that he believed her cousin had left this world comfortably. However, Camu looked at him and expressed her doubts, stating that she was a genius and understood a little of what was said. She asked him to tell her honestly if what she heard was true. Vikir felt tense and wondered if she had understood the barbarian's words correctly. What the barbarian had said previously was, "We ate her." Tears once again flooded Camu's eyes, and she fell to her knees, apologizing for not being able to protect her younger cousin. Vikir witnessed her anguish and initially extended his hand to comfort her. However, he hesitated and retracted his hand back. Camu's cries filled the air, leaving Vikir standing there, pondering the situation. After a while, Camu managed to compose herself, wiping away the tears that stained her cheeks. She made it clear that she didn't want any half-hearted sympathy, stating that she would have killed anyone who offered it. Looking at Vikir, she declared that it wasn't the time to mourn and that she needed to regain her composure quickly to seek revenge. Vikir admired Camu's strength and determination, acknowledging that heroines were indeed different. He reached out his hand towards her, agreeing with her sentiments. However, just as Camu was about to take his hand, a loud sound echoed through the air, resembling the ringing of a bell. Curious about the source of the sound, Vikir questioned its origin. Camu stood up and explained that it was a signal, notifying them of a barbarian attack. Vikir commented that her time for revenge had come rather quickly. Outside the fortress, a group of barbarian girls sat atop white wolves, armed with bows and arrows. Their leader, a skilled archer, notched an arrow and shot it towards the guards stationed on the fortress walls. Caught off guard, the guards had no time to react as the arrow exploded near them, causing devastation. The barbarian girl signaled her companions to begin the attack. With their wolves, they engaged in a fierce battle against the soldiers of the Morgue clan. The wolves fought ferociously, while the barbarians slashed at their enemies. They skillfully used ropes to incapacitate the soldiers, tightening them around their necks. In the midst of the chaotic scene, Vikir arrived and witnessed the gruesome sight. He wondered if he had arrived too quickly, observing the intense battle between the Morgue soldiers and the barbarians. Suddenly, a rope flew towards Vikir and wrapped tightly around his neck. Confused, he looked ahead and realized that two barbarian girls had skillfully used ropes to capture him. They spoke in their native language, mentioning something about catching a good catch and their successful hunt for husbands. Understanding their intentions, Vikir contemplated the barbarians' plan to capture people and make them suitors, aiming to create a superior tribe. He quickly seized hold of the rope and swung it, sending the girls flying through the air. With a grin, he informed them that he couldn't be their husband and jokingly added that he might already be engaged. As the two barbarian girls crashed onto the ground, the male barbarians watched in shock. Uncertain of Vikir's affiliation, they readied their arrows, preparing for an attack. One of them asked his companion if Vikir belonged to the enemy forces. Undeterred by the situation, Vikir didn't back down. He bravely moved forward, marching straight towards the incoming arrows. In his mind, he remembered Hugo's request to avoid initiating a battle until joining up with the main force. He pondered whether he should wait or take action. With unwavering determination, Vikir unsheathed his sword and deftly cut down the incoming arrows with precise strikes, showcasing his impressive skill and agility. The barbarians were astonished by Vikir's display of prowess and expressed their disbelief. However, their surprise was short-lived as a sudden burst of fire engulfed them, causing cries of pain. Camu, who had cast the fire spell, emerged from behind Vikir, expressing her anger towards the barbarians and declaring their imminent demise. Vikir stared at Camu in awe, realizing that she had turned the entire area into a blazing inferno. Camu questioned Vikir, asking if he had used liquid aura, indicating that she recognized his abilities as a graduator. She stated that she knew he was the only man she could acknowledge. Vikir confirmed that he had received an order from the Patriarch to avoid battles until regrouping with the main force. Unfazed by the situation, Camu began casting multiple spells and inquired if it was an order from Baskerville's Patriarch. She asserted that a Baskerville should refrain from intervening, as she intended to eliminate all the barbarians. Camu unleashed a series of powerful attacks, engulfing a vast area in front of them with scorching flames. Vikir watched in shock, recognizing the spell as burn. He also noticed that she employed a quadricasting technique for her burning spells, increasing their lethality. Driven by her desire to avenge her younger cousin, Camu continued to cast spells, resolute in her quest for revenge. Suddenly, a barbarian used a blow dart and shot a needle that landed on Camu's neck. Feeling the sting, she realized she had been poisoned. Camu noticed a barbarian riding on the back of a wolf, responsible for the attack. Unable to move due to the numbing poison, Camu fell to the ground. Vikir observed her condition and thought to himself that she was quite a handful. The barbarian then threw a rope towards Camu, but Vikir swiftly caught it before it could reach her. Camu acknowledged his catch and complimented him. Looking at her, Vikir suggested that it would be better for them to retreat. Camu questioned what would happen to the farmlands and the captives. Vikir replied that it would be wiser to avoid engaging in battles until the main force from Baskerville arrived. Refusing to retreat, Camu was determined to avenge her cousin who had been taken by the barbarians. Vikir gazed at her and urged her to make a rational decision. However, in the next moment, Vikir sensed an arrow attack coming from behind his head. With quick reflexes, he managed to dodge the arrow just in time. Vikir observed the barbarian girl who had launched the arrow and wondered if this was the destructive power Camu had mentioned earlier. Lost in his thoughts, he was caught off guard as a barbarian approached from behind and swiftly took Camu away. Desperate, Camu called out Vikir's name, pleading for his help. Frustrated by the unfolding scene, Vikir contemplated the situation. He recalled a past incident when Camu Morgue, still an adolescent, had been held captive but returned after annihilating the barbarians. Despite her reputation as the Queen of Le Rouge et Le Noir, Vikir realized that he needed to take action. Suddenly, the barbarian girl lunged at Vikir, launching an attack. With remarkable agility, he evaded her strike, his senses heightened. To his surprise, he noticed that she had used a bow to attack him. The barbarian girl then attempted to speak in his language. "You, me. We meet again," she said. Vikir looked at her and recognized her as the barbarian girl he had freed during the slave auctions. In his mind, he couldn't help but label her as a troublemaker. Vikir notices who the barbarian was. He recalls seeing her at the slave auction as the one that he had let go. Vikir asks her if she was repaying his kindness with revenge, but she tells him that she was a slave, and needed to take revenge for her capture, and that it has nothing to do with him, just the Morgue family. She leaps onto her pet wolf. As she turns to leave with her group, she tells Vikir that she had repaid what she got, and that they had taken the next leader of the Morgue family, Camu, and that if he wanted her back, he needed to follow them. Vikir thinks about revealing his power here, but Uncle Adolf had arrived. He was shouting after Camu while bringing the reinforcement. Vikir sees him and thinks that he had run all the way here after hearing about the ambush. Just as Adolf prepares a blue spell in his hand, he calls the barbarians bastards. He unleashes the spell into the group, sending shockwaves that appear to chase after the barbarians, as he shouts at them to return back Camu to him, but the barbarians were unaffected by the shockwaves from the ground. As they easily rode their wolves, dodging the attack and making a swift exit, they leaped through the rubble that the spell had caused that slowly disappeared from the base. Vikir and Adolf along with the reinforcements could only curse and stare at the barbarians as they easily left them behind. Vikir thinks about the Balak's ambush. Seeing that they had finished the ambush just 3 minutes after the warning bell had been rung, things became worse because it overlapped with Camu's carelessness and lack of practical experience. Vikir notices that a subordinate was telling Adolf that they believed that the Balaks had run off to the restricted area of the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain. Adolf couldn't believe that the Balaks had gone into the restricted area of the mountain with Camu. Adolf thinks about the restricted area, knowing that it was undiscovered and a dangerous place. Heading there at night was going to be too dangerous, he thinks about Camu and wondered if there was nothing he could do now, but Vikir joins into their talk, telling them that they could still pursue the Balaks, catching Adolf's and his men attention. He tells them that he had been in the dense forest before in his childhood, but deep down in his thoughts, Vikir knew about the forest because of his past regression, and that he had recon and subjugation experience as he went through most of the dense forest. Adolf grabs Vikir's shoulder because of what he just said, asking Vikir if he was actually serious. The man behind Adolf informs him that going into the Le Rouge mountain itself was a suicide mission, but Adolf tells him that he will only bring those that want to go, and wouldn't make an issue out of it later. As Vikir nervously looks at Adolf's hand on his shoulder, Adolf thought to himself that he already knew that Vikir was extraordinary but had no other choice than to rely on him. The moonlight pierces the skies as Adolf tells Vikir that he will leave it to him to save his niece Camu. A metal fence is seen with a skull sign. It was the booty of the dense forest on the Le Rouge mountain residing on the Baskerville territory. Inside the dense forest, there were many creatures such as the bone-sucking mosquitoes, poisonous thorny vines, silent spiders and other dangerous creatures. A normal human being would never last for more than an hour in there, which was why it was called the life-engulfing forest. Something bounces off a tree branch. Adolf and his men are seen following a red streak of light bouncing side to side. Adolf asks Staffordshire if all the kids from the Baskerville clan were like Vikir, but he tells him of course not as the triplets follow them from behind. Yellow hornets with red glowing eyes appears. Just like the ones in Pokemon, Vikir grabs onto his sword, preparing himself just as Staffordshire tells Adolf that Vikir was special. Vikir easily slices the yellow hornets into pieces. The triplets stare at him in amazement. All of them were thinking about how cool Vikir was. Vikir peeks out from his cover, sending a signal to everyone else, catching Adolf and Staffordshire's attention. A bright orange glow is seen in the distance as Vikir tells them that he doesn't think that the barbarians have gotten far. He tells them of a rumor he heard, that the Balak hunter would scatter dry leaves to hear the sound of their chasers. He warns them that they needed to be more careful from here onwards. Adolf approaches Vikir and casts a spell called Silence. He explains to him that this magic would prevent him from making noise as he walks. Adolf tells Vikir to let him take over from here and that he won't forget this, calling him nephew-in-law. Vikir grows nervous at the thought of this nephew-in-law. A campfire is lit, showing that the barbarians were all gathered around the fire with their wolves on standby. Camu was tied to a string, shouting at them, calling them bitches, and that once she was free, she will burn them all to death. She continues to yell at them, telling them that she'll show them the horror of her special fireball and that they should prepare themselves, but they ignored her, Two females were talking about how they liked the guy they saw before and that they failed in husband hunting. Camu began to breath heavily from all the shouting as sweat drips down her face. She thinks about how they weren't even listening to her, and that they've been talking about husband and wife hunting since earlier. She wonders if that was why they kept ambushing them, but a foot appears near her. A male barbarian appears stroking his chin, saying that since they captured Camu, all the males within the tribe would want her. Camu yells at him, calling him a perverted bastard, asking what he was planning to do to her and that they should kill her instead. But the man cleaned his ears, saying he doesn't understand what she was saying. He grabs her face instead, knowing that she was talking back because of the look in her eyes. He licks an arrow as he stares at Camu's face, telling her that an arrogant slave should be disciplined, but Ayan interrupts them. She calls him a Hun and tells him to get away from her slave. A Hun talks back to Ayan, saying that he was the one who captured Camu. But Ayan tells him that it was bullshit and to keep his voice down. But a Hun continues to argue, saying he was the one that shot the paralyzing arrow and set up the trap. But Ayan tells him that she made it possible because she stopped Vikir, who was good with the sword, or else he would be dead. Camu stares at them arguing and wonders if an internal argument was breaking out. She looks at Ayan and assumes she was the commander. She thinks deeply about how Ayan had the skill to go against Vikir, who was a low-ranking graduator, and that if she wanted to escape, Camu needed to do something about Ayan first. A Hun continues to shout at Ayan, telling her that he won't let her stubbornness slide just because she was the commander. But Ayan's hand began to glow blue. She lets out an intense glare at a Hun, revealing a horrifying blue aura, as she tells him that if he was angry, he could come at her any time, and she would turn him into a bloody mess. Seeing Ayan this way sent an overwhelming sense of fear into a Hun. He then decides to give up and back off as Ayan continued to stare at him intensely. Camu sees a Hun leaving angrily and thought that Ayan had won. Ayan praises Camu's eyes and physique as she came from a good bloodline, but she kicks into Camu's shoulder hard, telling Camu that she was captured by the Morgue clan bastards and sold into slavery. As Camu lets out a painful grunt, Ayan recalls her meeting with Vikir, and that she was lucky to receive some kindness that allowed for her to escape from the fate of a slave. But her eyes were filled with anger as she tells Camu that she won't be as lucky, and that she'll take her time to tame Camu so much that she would feel it in her bones and soul, making licking the spaces between her toes a daily routine for Camu. But an explosion erupts all of a sudden behind Ayan. Ayan turns around and both her and Camu were shocked to see the explosion. The barbarians shouted out that it was an ambush, as some of them were set on fire, screaming in pain. Footsteps are seen walking through the fire. Adolf appears among the flames, calling out to barbarians that he had come to repay them for what they did. Camu was happy to recognize that voice. She sees that it was her uncle, with fire in his hand. Adolf shouts to them to return his niece back to him this instant. The barbarians could only stare as everything was set ablaze in front of them. They see that the Morgue and Baskerville clan members were easily killing each of the barbarians. Vikir was sitting on a branch of a tree, witnessing how everything was unfolding. He looks at the scene before him, thinking that something was strange. He wondered why the Balax who ambushed them before so perfectly was now panicking this easily from an attack. The barbarians turned to run away from the attack on their wolves, calling the Morgue and Baskerville clans crazy bastards for causing such an uproar inside the forest in the middle of the night. But Adolf shouts at his members, telling them to not let a single barbarian run away alive. Just as two Morgue members chased after the barbarians, Camu laughs at the barbarians and tells them they were getting what they deserved, but a sound rustles behind her, causing her to sit upright. Her face grew nervous as she slowly turns around to see what it was. It was Vikir. He signals to her to be quiet as she yells out his name. He cuts the ropes that were tying Camu to the tree with ease. Camu is happy to see him as he lifts her up, asking if he came to save her. Vikir replies back to her if she doesn't understand what hand gesture was used for keeping quiet, but their chat was cut off as Ayan appears before them, telling Vikir that she knew that the boy who uses knives well would come. She tells him that his strong physique that made it possible to cover a long distance within a short period of time, and his level-headedness that made it possible for him to get through the darkness of the forest, adding on his passionate and pure love that made him put his life on the line for his girl. All these conditions were perfect. As Ayan tells Vikir that she won't ask about his past and that he had passed, Vikir looks at her and wondered what he had passed. But Camu and Ayan send lightning stares at one another as they both know what each of them wanted. Vikir is a ladies' man. Vikir pulls Camu closer to him, causing her to blush slightly, as he thinks about not being able to hide his powers in this situation, and that he couldn't recall anything about Ian from his past life. Ian seemed pissed that Camu was close to Vikir, as he wonders if she was the one that gave the nose bridge scar to Hugo's face, and if she was the Black Archer Night Fox, but he changes his thought as he realizes that she was too young and unskilled to be the Night Fox, but was probably someone who had the same bloodline. But as they were talking, a blow dart is seen pointing at them. Vikir sees the attack going to Camu and easily blocks it with his hand. Hun was shocked to see this and wondered how Vikir knew as he was hiding in the bushes. Vikir decides to pick up Camu, causing her to scream a bit as he realized that things had become bothersome. He tells Camu to bear it with him for a little, and that he will return her to his uncle. Camu agrees shyly, thinking that he was still out of it as he was using formal language, which might be because of the poison. Vikir and Camu quickly leap away, leaving Ian to stand alone in silence. She scratches her head, saying that she wanted Vikir to return with her obediently. As Vikir and Camu escape, he asks her if she was severely poisoned. Camu replies SHLY while blushing that she thinks so. All of a sudden 2 barbarians appear and shoot arrows at them. Vikir manages to block their attacks with his sword as Camu shrieks from fear. Ian then prepares her arrow, lightly releasing a blue aura that covered the arrow. She stretches the bowstring and prepares her shot, with her arrow glowing blue intensely, her gaze filled with focus as she prepares to get rid of Camu. She lets go of the arrow, which unleashes a powerful blue streak of light. The arrow soon reaches the back of Vikir as he carries Camu. He turns his head in a swift motion and sees the powerful arrow reaching them. Camu turns as well due to Vikir and sees the arrow just inches away from her eye. Huge pillars of ice suddenly erupt throughout the forest following the attack of the arrow. Sweat drips down Camu's face as she spots the arrow standing still just inches from her face. Adolf appears and had used ice magic to freeze the arrow from attack Vikir and Camu. He shouts at Camu asking if she was alright. Camu was glad to see her uncle arrived. Adolf casts Cure Poison to heal Camu. He holds Camu dearly and mentioned that the poison was really severe and numbing, which was difficult for him to remove everything, and tells her that they needed to visit the Divine Quo Vadis when they return. But Camu pushes his hand away, asking him to let her go for a moment. Instead she runs towards Vikir and hugs him with all her might, telling him that he had saved her again. Seeing the shocked Adolf, tears filled his eyes and he tries to tell her that he too also tried his best, but Camu was not happy with him. She yells at him, wondering why he had only come now and that she was going to tell her mother everything. Just as Camu was yelling at Adolf, a rope appears around Vikir's face. The rope tightly wraps itself around Vikir's neck as Ian appears behind him, holding the rope tightly and surprising Vikir. She tries her best to pull Vikir but couldn't. She wondered why he was so strong and why he wasn't moving backwards. She tells Vikir to be obedient and to let himself be captured as she was running out of time. Vikir easily snaps the rope into pieces, thinking why was there no time. Camu yells at her, saying it was you again. Vikir thought deeply about the reason why the Balak were in a hurry. Soon enough a demonic being gaze was felt. An ominous deadly aura was felt throughout the forest. Ian trembles in fear as she gazes at the sky, saying shit, did it finally noticed. Even Vikir's weapon Beelzebub was activating on its own and causes a buzz. Vikir looks at it, wondering why the Beelzebub in his veins were giving him an intense warning. He knew that it meant that something was coming. Ian tells him that she was coming as sweat drips down her face. Fear overtook her as she spoke its name, Madame Eight Legs. As she looked up, a sudden pillar appeared as though it pierced through the forest and was aiming for the skies. Everyone looked at it. The barbarians and even its wolves were terrified at its appearance, saying that the madam was here. Vikir and Camu looked up and wondered why a pillar had appeared. The pillar was releasing a scary-looking purple aura, and soon split into various legs. Hell no, if I was there I would be running away instantly. Like by Felicia, the legs attack various places throughout the forest. As Adolf covers Camu and Vikir, he questions why there was such a monsters hiding in the forest. Vikir recalls what the monster was and didn't expect to see it in a place like this. If Vikir's memory was right, it was Madame Eight Legs who had an S rank rating. Madame Eight Legs lets out a horrifying shriek of madness that was heard throughout the forest as the three of them stare in horror. As Camu tries to shout out what that was, Vikir quickly covers her mouth, telling her that she can't make loud noises. He explains to her that even though Madame Eight Leg has poor sight, it has sensitive touch and hearing. Vikir recalls an old native prior to his regression, about the incidents seen and heard about at the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain. The legend the elder told seemed like a horror story. It was a horror story about the madam with 8 legs which inhabited in the depths of the forest, according to the Empire's Monster Dictionary, which was finalized after 7 revisions. There were written records of Madam 8 Legs, that its risk ranking was S, and was a monster capable of destroying a nation within a single day, making it a disaster rank. Madam 8 Legs lets out a horrible shriek, causing green slime to spread all around from its mouth, as though it was part of Nickelodeon's slime show. The green slime melts the branches of the tree. Vikir dodges the green slime with ease while Adolf protects Camu from the slime using a spell shield, but Hunt lets out a scream like a little girl. He shouts out as Madam's poison had landed on his hair. No more man buns for him. The hair covered with poison was quickly cut off. Ian had cut it off, whispering to him that he was an idiot for screaming in front of the madam. Just as Hunt kneels down on the ground, Ian couldn't believe what happened and looked up. She sees that Madam 8 Legs was looking right at her. She tells Hunt that she would have killed him, but he was lucky that he was the grandchild of the shaman. She whispers to the others to quickly retreat. On the other side, Vikir and others were making a run for it too, as Adolf whispers to them that they needed to get away. But Madam 8 Legs had spotted both groups and slowly senses their movements with her. I don't know what this is, man. Is this a tongue? Comment below what you think this part is. Madam 8 Legs had spotted the 2 groups who were retreating differently. The Ballacks were running away in small groups just like the blue dots, whereas the Morgues and Baskerville members were running away in a large group just like the red dots. There was a slight difference in how the 2 groups retreated, but it made the madam decide who to chase after. It decided to chase Vikir and the others. Adolf asked why it was coming their way. A member of the Morgue clan tells Adolf to leave it to him as he knew that a bug's weakness was a fire attack. He conjures a huge fireball and sends it flying towards the madam. It lands and causes a huge explosion in its face. The members saw the explosion and believed that the fireball attack had worked. The man asked Adolf if he had saw that, but was interrupted when one of Madam's legs pierced through the man beside him into the air. The man could only stare as blood flew all over from its attack. Blood was spilled on his face as tears began to form. He looks at the madam and realized that the fireball attack had nothing. Adolf was panicking as he was running away, wondering what the hell was that. But Vikir was deep in thought. He decided that this was it. As the others continued to run away, Vikir had turned around, surprising them. Staffordshire sees this and asks what Vikir was doing. Vikir tells him that at the rate they were going, they were all going to be killed, so one of them is needed to tie down the monster's legs. Staffordshire then offers to do it, but Vikir cuts him off, telling him that his skills were not enough to tie down the monster's leg. Everyone could only stare at Vikir in silence as he explained to them that they couldn't afford to bring the monster back into the territory with them, and that in the current situation, the best person has to tie its leg down, which was Vikir. As he holds his sword closely, he tells Adolf that there was no time and a decision was left at him, but Camu was shocked to see what Vikir was doing. Adolf hesitated at the idea of leaving behind Vikir alone, but Vikir tells him to hurry and run away. Adolf then decides to leave Vikir, telling the others to not let his nephew-in-law's sacrifice be in vain. Tears form in Camu's eyes as she calls out to Vikir while Adolf pulls her away from him. Camu's voice could be heard telling Vikir to return, but Adolf tells her not to move as Vikir holds his sword tightly, but he lets out a deep breath and lets go of his sword. He looks ahead and thinks that he has no intention in the destruction of the Baskerville territory, and that the Allied forces could not stop the madam who was still growing. However, this was a good opportunity for Vikir, as he plans to fake his death in order to get away from Hugo. To buy enough time for him to learn the 10th technique in his head, he decides to return to the clan, only when he was skilled enough to not be pushed around by Hugo, or when he had perfect control over his skill. Being able to hide and control it was when he will return. Vikir unleashes the full power of Beelzebub in his arm, revealing its demonic energy blade. Knowing that if he doesn't go all out, he would die, Madam 8 Legs stares at Vikir as Vikir stares back at it, preparing himself for his hardest fight yet. The Baskervilles and Beelzebub's demonic energy surrounds Vikir's body as he slowly unleashes all his skills. The large amount of mana he received from the river Styx's blessing, the aura that was more worldly and used for high-ranking Baskerville swordsmanship techniques, and finally, the demonic sword Beelzebub. Vikir's eyes were filled with intense focus as he tells the monster that he was going to use everything he has to attack it. Vikir leaps forward with crazy speed in a zigzag motion, and leaps through all the trees in the forest into the night sky. The The red aura follows him as he makes his way into the clouds, his demonic sword glowed red as he sees Madame Eight Legs right in front of him. Madame Eight Legs lets out a shriek as it spots Vikir in the air. Vikir gives it a bombastic side-eye while raising his sword up in the air, unleashing an immensely powerful attack that turned the pages black and white and the drawer colorblind, revealing a bright red attack from him that strikes Madame Eight Leg head-on. It was the Baskerville's fifth technique. Fury rose in Vikir's face as he attacks with all his soul and strength. Madame Eight Legs soon began to tremble from the power of Vikir's strike, causing it to slam into Mother Earth as Vikir's attack was powerful enough to force it to the ground. The attack caused a bright red glow to appear in the forest, which began to shine like a diamond in the sky. Soon a huge crimson red glow appears in the forest and reaches for the sky. Just as Adolf and the others made it out of the forest, Camu sees the intense glow unveiling right before her eyes. Tears fall from her face as she witnesses what happens next. The red glow slowly begins to die down as Camu screams out, "Vikir!" Vikir is seen tied to a guillotine, awaiting his death as two bloodhound guards stood by his sides holding their swords up high. Vikir wore an expressionless face as he thinks about his final moments. But even in his final moments, his eyes were filled with an intense red glow as he stares at something in front of him. Hugo was standing proud and tall as the moonlight casts light on him, as a platoon of bloodhounds stood behind him. Hugo slowly raises his hand in the air while his eyes glowed bright red in the night. His eyes released an intense glow and glare as he pushes his hand in a downward motion. The sound of a sharp blade meeting flesh and bone was heard in the night as blood was seen splattered in the sky. Vikir's vision of Hugo and the others were now at a low viewpoint as everything started to look hazy. Blood soon filled his vision as he looks at the numerous red stares from his once former family members. Hugo slowly walks away from Vikir as his vision was almost filled with blood. But his eyes were still focused on Hugo's head as he left Vikir alone. "Hugo, so in the end you," muttered Vikir as his vision fades to black. Vikir then slowly opens his eyes after awakening from his dream. He stares at the ceiling and saw that he was in some sort of cottage. Bandages covered his face and body as he lay on a bed made of something while his neck was tied to a rope. He wonders what this place is. He thinks about how he didn't know how many days had passed, or how he had survived the battle against Madame Eight Legs. He recalls back to the moment when he had unleashed his most powerful attack on Madame Eight Leg, realizing that during that crucial moment, if Madame hadn't stopped in her tracks upon receiving a shock from the explosion's light, Vikir would have lost his life. Vikir slowly sits upright while holding his injured shoulder. He thinks about how his muscles, veins, and even bones were all injured. There wasn't a place in his body where he felt uninjured. Vikir didn't think this would be the extent of his injuries after receiving a hit head-on. He realizes that he had misjudged Madame's attack power so bad that he could even feel it in his bones. Vikir then holds onto the rope around his neck, wondering if it was because of this that caused him to have a neck ache that he was feeling now after the battle against Madame, but it was because of it that he was saved. Vikir started to think about the others, and wondered if he could consider it as going according to plan. His plan of escaping Hugo's watch was a success as, besides Adolf and Camu, many other witnesses could prove his death, allowing Vikir to not worry about his death being proven. Vikir exits the cottage tent and notices something. He sees barbarians of different ages and genders walking around. He recognizes it as the Balak's camp called Beelzebub, and he wonders if he was being held captive in their camp. Vikir thinks about how he was in the midst of the camp that belongs to the natural enemies of the Baskerville clan, which was bad for him as he couldn't run away with his ruined body. A voice shouts out saying, "Hurry up! Walk," just as a group of prisoners appeared behind Vikir with their hands bound together. A female barbarian was holding the rope attached to 4 of the men's necks as prisoners while shouting at them that if they don't move quickly they would die from the wolf's bite. Vikir watches them from a distance and was surprised as he recognizes their faces as people who were soldiers from the Baskerville and Morgue clans. He watches them leave thinking about why he was not being executed. A foot appears behind him saying that he was up. Vikir looks back and sees a punk rock hairstyle barbarian male asking him if he could speak Balak. Vikir recognizes the barbarian as Ahun, the barbarian holding the dart blower who tried to attack him from the bushes a few days ago. Ahun tells Vikir that he should be thankful that he wasn't going to end up with the same fate as the prisoners he had just seen. Hun then smirks right in the face of Vikir's, asking him how he felt watching his comrades walk towards their death, and that he must be in despair since he could not do anything with that crippled body. With an evil smile on his face, Hun tells Vikir that if he weren't the commander's pet dog, he would have boiled Vikir right away. Hearing the words pet dog triggered something deep within Vikir's soul. He visualizes Hugo's face with his hands filled with chains and a dark aura. The chains were slowly suffocating Vikir as his body was slowly being covered by the chains and dark aura. Hun suddenly felt an immense pressure, wondering what it was. He looks at Vikir and sees that his eyes were filled with murderous intent and that his haki was extremely strong. One Piece reference. Ahu responded with a punch to Vikir's face, calling him an arrogant bastard. The punch left Vikir on the ground trembling slightly as he didn't respond back. Hun leaves him alone, telling Vikir that he should stop standing there and go find his owner, who was at the end of the rope. Vikir slowly got up and looked at Hun walking away. His eyes were filled with revenge as he had memorized Hun's face and swore to get his revenge once his body recovers. Vikir walks past a few more cottage tents in the camp. He slowly pulls onto the rope inch by inch as he made his way out of the camp, wondering how the rope was this long. He walks a bit further but soon notices that he had walked quite a fair bit but still couldn't see the end of the rope, which causes him to wonder if his owner was actually at the end of the rope. All of a sudden the rope tightens itself. Vikir notices that the rope was being pulled in a certain direction. He sees that the end of the rope was leading into a pool of water, where Ayan was seen submerged inside. She was holding onto the end of the rope but remained silent. Vikir and Ayan were soon entering an awkward staring contest with one another, as Vikir stood on land while Ayan was submerged in the waters. She gives him a wide smile before telling him to lie down. Vikir was suddenly pulled forward by her. As his head was pulled forward by Ayan, a certain object went through the spot where his head was originally. An arrow lands on a tree. Ayan came out of the water and shouted at a group of children, calling them brats and telling them to go practice somewhere else. Meanwhile, Vikir was just laying on the ground motionless. Ayan then turns to him to thank him for setting her free at the slave auction. She points a finger at Vikir, telling him that she was the kind to return kindness twofold while returning tenfold when it comes to revenge, and since he had saved her once before, she had now saved him twice. Vikir wondered where the twice came from. She explains to him that she had gone back for him after his fight with Madame Eight Legs, and if she didn't do that he would have died, so he needed to be thankful that she was tenacious. Vikir then asks her if she was the one who had set up the rope attached to his neck. But Ayan simply smiled at him as he asks her another question about the reason why she was keeping him alive. The rope tightens around his neck, which catches Vikir's attention, while Ayan informs him that she noticed that Vikir seemed to be in a high position within his party. While pulling his rope, Ayan tells him how she wonders how much his party would pay for him. Vikir starts to grow nervous as he thought that he was in trouble. He knew that if the Barbarians started hostage negotiations with the Baskerville clan, his original plan of escaping Hugo's watch would have become meaningless. He thinks deeply about what he should do in this situation. Ayan flashes a smile and chuckles. She asks Vikir about what he was thinking and if he had felt a sense of hope. But CK. Ayan tells Vikir that unfortunately, he wasn't going back to his party as she pulls him closer while slowly taking out a blade from her thick juicy thigh. She cuts the long rope while telling Vikir that he was going to be her slave. Lucky man, but Vikir was actually glad to hear that. Ayan then points her blade towards Vikir, telling him that they should decide on their titles first and that Vikir should call her master. Sorry lady, but our hero ain't a beta, is a goddamn alpha, am I right, viewers? But Vikir doesn't respond at all and just remains silent like a giga chad. Ayan laughs and tells him that she liked his rebellious eyes and that it would be fun taming him. Ayan then sheets her blade back into its cover on her thigh. She looks forward and tells Vikir that before they get into the taming, they had to go somewhere else first. Vikir then asks her where they were going. Ayan smiles happily as the sunlight brightens her face. She tells Vikir that it was obvious. Vikir had to give his greetings when he stepped into someone else's land. A cottage tent is seen with skulls hung around, and on top of it, an arrow is pierced through the thick skull of a dead crocodile. Ayan informs Vikir that they will be visiting the village head, which is the matriarch, just as a fierce mommy-looking barbarian woman is seen sitting on top and around the dead bodies of animals who had their skulls pierced by a single arrow. Vikir and Ian were now walking back through the camp of the Balax together. Ian explains to Vikir that if he didn't have a place to sleep, you could just sleep under friend's hammock, and if he was ever hungry, he could get food from someone who was more affluent. Ian tells him that this was how the Balax were living as. She turns to Vikir and informs him that their way of life may mean nothing to outsiders, but to the people who lived here it was a very homely place, and that it would be good for Vikir to get used to their way of living. But Vikir commented that he noticed that the Balax had no regard for private assets. Ian then informs Vikir that they had arrived at the matriarch's house, which was the cottage tent covered with skulls shown before. Ian entered the house first and informs her mother that they were here. As Vikir entered the house he catches the word mother. Ian's mother stood up saying, "You're here." She takes note that Ian had brought back the empirical boy that she was talking about every day. Hearing this made Ian fluster as she tells her mother that she didn't talk about Vikir every day. Vikir connected the dots in his head after seeing that Ian was the matriarch's daughter of the Balak tribe, which might be that her mother was the Night Fox. The Night Fox was the female Balak warrior who had scarred Hugo's nose bridge, and was the reason behind why Vikir could not cross the Le Rouge et Le Noir Mountains landscape. Vikir thinks about his past self and wondered what would happen to his past version if he had gone up against her. He started to experiment in his head about his chances if he were to fight her in head-on combat, which ended up in 0%. He then thought of his chances of winning if he went through the assassination route, but realized that it was still at 0%. Vikir gulps nervously as a sweat drop drips down from his face after imaging those situations in his head. Seeing the Night Fox's intense deadly aura up close made him realize that if he had run away, his chances were only a mere 20%. But the 20% would only be referring to his survival rate. The Night Fox takes a look at Vikir's face and tells him that he had seen his face before. Vikir wondered nervously if she had realized that he was from the same bloodline as Hugo by instinct, but the Night Fox brushes it off by saying that most Imperial men look the same. She asks Ian about what she was planning on doing to Vikir as he was no different from a cripple, but Ian tells her that Vikir would be useful once he receives good treatment as he was the one who attacked Madame Eight Legs after all. But her mother warns her that taking action without knowing your place might come back to bite you. The Night Fox brushes off Ian's initial intentions as it didn't matter to her whether Vikir's body was destroyed or not. She only cared about whether his seed was fine. Ian became flustered and told her mother that it was not about that. Vikir begins to inspect certain objects in the house while the mother and daughter continued to argue. Ian tells her mother that she was going to use Vikir as a slave, but her mother was surprised to hear that as she was talking about doing something else to Vikir. Before her mother could complete her sentence, Ian yells at her that she just needed Vikir as a slave to support her during hunts. Night Fox soon pats Ian's head, which causes her to blush as she tells her that it is up to the owner to do what they want to do with their slave. Ian then takes a peek, and sees Vikir checking out the main pillar of the house. They soon left the house and went to walk back to the forest. As they walked together, Vikir tells Ian that he had a question. He asks her what her name was, causing Ian to yell at him about suddenly asking a question all of a sudden and how he dared to ask questions as a slave. But Vikir informs her that he does not intend to call her his master, which was why he asked what her name was. Ian rubs her head before telling Vikir that her name was Ian. Vikir then introduces himself as Vikir and asks her what she wanted him to do by her name. Ian was flustered at Vikir calling her by her name and told him how dare a slave call her by her name. She then decides to give Vikir his first order. Ian points her finger at her and shouts out that his first order was to build a house that he will be living in from now on. Ian thinks mischievously about how Vikir was acting too arrogant as a slave, and that there was no way an imperial bastard like him would know how to build a house. She continues to think that ordering a slave around was part of a master's competency and that she needed to use this chance to rebalance the hierarchy between them. Meanwhile, Vikir was thinking about the first order of building a house. He smiles and says that this was going to be fun. After some time we see Ian standing still with her hands behind her back wearing a stunned expression on her face. Vikir points to a makeshift tent and tells her that he had carried out her order. She looks at the tent that Vikir built and wondered why he was so good at building tents. She thought that he would have struggled to build a house because of his injured body. Ayan turns around to look at the building materials that she brought over. She thinks that since he managed to build the house, there was no use for the items that she had brought with her. Vikir was happy with the house he built as he thought that it had been a while. He recalls his past memories during the time of destruction when swordsmen were only good at wielding swords, which was why they couldn't survive. So in order to survive in extreme situations, one would need to learn a variety of survival skills. Ayan inspects the drains that Vikir had dug out and commented that they were perfect too. Vikir informs her that the matriarch's tent looked unstable. This catches Ayan's attention as it was about her mother. Vikir explained to her in detail in regards to her mother's tent problems, stating that in its current state, during the rainy seasons the ground around the central pillar will shake, which might cause water to leak through. If she orders him to, Vikir was willing to mix slimy dirt and gravel on the opposite hill to create bricks, which he will reinforce the bricks by spreading oil and burning it. Hearing the long explanation made Ayan order Vikir to do what he said, as she was thinking the same thing. Vikir then went on to gather the materials to create the bricks as Ayan watched him from behind a tree. He then started to roast the brick mixture to form the actual bricks while Ayan watched closely by his side. They soon met up with the matriarch once again, with Vikir carrying a wagon filled with the bricks he had made. Night Fox was surprised to learn about her house problems from them. After a while, Vikir had created a solution made up of bricks to help resolve the issues the matriarch's house was having. The matriarch tells them that she was frustrated because of the numerous amount of times she had tried to repair the roof. Water would still be leaked through. She now realizes that the main problem was the main pillar. She tells Vikir that he had done a good job while informing her daughter that she had picked up quite a useful mail. She then instructs Vikir to go around the barracks to take care of tedious matters such as this. Ayan remains silent while looking concerned at Vikir nods his head upon hearing her mother's command. Vikir was seen washing the rags at a nearby river when Ayan calls out to him, catching his attention. She asks him if it was exhausting to just slave away and wonders if he wants to be an official member of their tribe. Vikir continues to wash the rags while answering her that slaving away wasn't too bad. He thinks about how it was much more peaceful being a slave here than being part of the Baskervilles or living in the Underdog city. Ayan was surprised to hear that kind of reply from Vikir. She stated that from the way Vikir spoke he had been disciplined well, and that from a slave's perspective, it would be hard to complain. Vikir continued to tell her that it really was not that bad. Ayan the replies saying there was no way it wasn't when he was doing tough and tedious work. Vikir ignores her and continues to do his work. Ayan follows behind him and tells him to not be silent and to follow her, as she would be able to help him in terms of surviving and adjusting in the Balak's tribe. Ayan informs him that if he does a good job, she will remove the rope around his neck. This offer catches Vikir's attention and he turns around to tell her that offer sounded appealing. He then asks her about what he should do. Ayan smiles and tells him that he was now being honest. She tells Vikir that he needed to go on a hunt and capture a huge prey. She explained that the tribe's warriors haven't been able to catch prey large enough, making the growing children unable to eat meat for a while. In other words, Vikir needed to bring in a huge prey so that changing his title from slave to commoner wouldn't be a pipe dream. Ayan then smacks the back of Vikir's heart, causing him to flinch. With a smile on her face, she tells Vikir that he had no problem moving light objects and that all he needed to do was just assist her. Vikir was showing an annoyed expression after being smacked on the back, just as Ayan tells him about how lucky he was to be the slave of the Balak's hunting commander. Vikir thought about the job of hunting for a moment and then agreed to join Ayan in hunting. Hearing this brought joy to Ayan as she smiles widely while blushing a bit. She tells Vikir that they would be leaving tomorrow, but Vikir was curious about why she was smiling like that. Ayan tells him she wasn't, just as a foot appears behind a tree. Ahan was glaring angrily upon hearing the conversation between Ayan and Vikir. He sees how close Vikir was getting to Ayan and calls him a disgusting bastard. Jelly much? Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.